Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to Wideawakehorror today. Just want to say, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join the family. And as always, if you like these stories, you know what to do. Smash that like button and let us know in the comments what you think. And as always, enjoy the stories.
I had been on Tinder for a while, swiping through the endless sea of profiles. It felt like a game most of the time. Right swipe if they're cute, left swipe if they're not, simple as that. I wasn't expecting anything serious. But then, one night, I came across her profile. She had this infectious smile and a warmth that radiated through her photos. Her bio was simple: love coffee, spontaneous adventures, and deep conversations. Honestly, it sounded a little cliché, but it worked on me. I swiped right. It wasn't long before she swiped right back. Her name was Olivia. We matched and immediately started chatting. I remember the first message she sent. "Hey, I saw your profile and I had to ask. Do you believe in love at first swipe?" Cheesy, sure, but it broke the ice in a way that made me laugh. We hit it off instantly, texting nonstop. We talked about everything: movies, hobbies, random thoughts we had during the day. It didn't feel forced, like the way conversations sometimes go on Tinder. No awkward pauses, no weird small talk. It felt like we had known each other forever. A couple of days into our chat, she suggested we meet up. She was just as gorgeous in real life as she was in her photos. Maybe even more so. We agreed on a coffee shop downtown. I was both nervous and excited. Meeting someone online was always a little sketchy, but Olivia had a way of making me feel completely at ease. When I got to the coffee shop, I was early. I grabbed a seat by the window, hoping to spot her when she arrived. And then, a few minutes later, I saw her walking toward the door. I couldn't help but smile. She was exactly as I'd imagined. She waved when she saw me, and I waved back. She came over, sat down, and we exchanged the usual pleasantries. Everything felt normal, comfortable even. At first, everything seemed perfect. We laughed, talked about our favorite music, and shared stories from our lives. The conversation was flowing smoothly, and I was starting to feel like I had finally met someone who really got me. But as the conversation went on, something started to feel off. She kept bringing up details of my life that I had never mentioned in our chats. Small things like my favorite childhood book, the name of my first pet, the nickname my friends had for me in high school. Things I'd only shared with people close to me. It was strange, almost like she had been keeping tabs on me. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe it was just a coincidence or a lucky guess. But then, the odd comments started getting more specific. She mentioned a road trip I had taken with friends last summer. A trip I never posted on social media or shared with anyone except a few close friends. I stared at her for a moment, trying to process what she had just said. She saw my reaction and smiled softly. "You're probably wondering how I knew that, huh?" she said, her voice soft and almost too calm. "I've been watching you for a while." I laughed nervously, trying to play it off. "What you mean?" "You've been stalking my social media or something." She shook her head. "Not exactly. Let's just say I've been keeping an eye on you long before we matched on here." Now, I started feeling really uneasy. I tried to keep the smile on my face, but my stomach was doing flips. "Okay, you're scaring me a little," I said, half joking, but I was starting to get worried. Was she some kind of psycho? She didn't laugh, though. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. There was a certain intensity there that made me feel like she wasn't just playing around. It was like she was looking straight into my soul. "Do you know why I'm here?" she asked. "Why I chose you?" I shifted in my seat, suddenly unsure of how to respond. I had no clue what she was talking about, but I was starting to get a bad feeling about this whole thing. Was she trying to freak me out on purpose, or was there something else going on? Olivia's expression didn't change. "I've been using my sister's profile for a while. She's the one who set this up." "Wait, what?" I asked, still not sure if she was joking. You're telling me you weren't really who I thought you were. She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold, calculating. I am who I am. But I've been using her profile to lure you in. And now you're the chosen one. I felt my heart race in my chest. Chosen for what? This wasn't a joke anymore. It was like something out of one of those weird true crime documentaries, but this wasn't some random stranger. I'd been talking to her for days, and now she was telling me things that were beyond strange. I tried to stand up, but my legs felt weak, like I couldn't move. Something about her presence had completely unsettled me. I wanted to get out of there, but I couldn't tear myself away. It was as though she was controlling me without even saying a word. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn notebook. "This is for you," she said, pushing it across the table toward me. I looked down at it, then back at her. "What's this?" I asked, but I already had a sinking feeling in my gut. Olivia's smile grew wider, almost too wide. "It's your future," she said, her voice now dropping into something almost whisper-like. "You're going to help us complete the ritual. You're going to be a part of something much bigger than you could ever imagine." I stared at her, trying to process her words. "Ritual? What are you talking about?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stood up slowly, walking toward the door. "You'll understand soon enough," she said as she left, leaving me sitting there, frozen in place. The rest of the day felt like a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Had it all been a game to her? Was she playing some sick prank, or was she serious about whatever strange plan she had for me? I didn't know what to think, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to get away from her. I stopped responding to her messages after that day, and thankfully, she never reached out again. I never saw her again, but the thought of her, of what she might have been planning, haunts me to this day. Maybe she was just another creepy person on the internet. Maybe it was all just a strange coincidence, and I was overthinking it. But I'll never forget the way she looked at me, the way she said I was the chosen one. That was something I couldn't just brush off. I almost didn't go that night. That's the part that keeps replaying in my head now. Like when your phone keeps showing you an old photo you forgot about. I was sitting on my bed scrolling through Tinder, half bored, half tired, the same way everyone does when they tell themselves they're going to sleep soon but don't. My room was dark except for my phone screen and the streetlight leaking through the blinds. It was one of those slow nights where every profile looked the same and every bio felt copied from somewhere else. Then his profile showed up. The first thing I noticed was the photo. Just a normal guy, maybe mid-20s, short dark hair, that slightly crooked smile people practice in mirrors. He looked friendly, but not fake friendly. Like the type of guy who actually held the door open for people instead of pretending for a photo. His name was Ryan. The bio was short. It said he worked at a marina nearby and liked late-night food runs. For some reason, that felt more real than the usual bios. We matched almost instantly. I remember thinking it was weird how fast it happened, like he had already been on my profile or something. My phone buzzed again right after. He sent a message. The conversation moved fast. Not in a creepy way. Just easy. We talked about random stuff. The worst movies we had seen. Dumb childhood stories. He told me about working on boats and how the docks got really quiet at night. I told him about my college classes and how I kept staying up too late watching dumb videos. It felt normal. Too normal, maybe. After maybe 40 minutes, he suggested meeting that night. There was a bar downtown called The Lantern. It stayed open late, and it wasn't super loud like the club places. He said he was already there with a drink, and it would be cool if I stopped by. Normally, I would have said no. Meeting someone that quick felt rushed. But the place was public, and honestly, I was bored and curious. I told myself it would just be one drink. If it felt weird, I could leave. So I got dressed, grabbed my jacket, and drove over. The lantern sits on the corner of an older street near the harbor. The building looks kind of worn, but in a cozy way. Warm lights inside, old wood tables, music playing low enough that people can still talk. I had been there once before with friends. When I pulled up, the street looked quieter than usual. A few cars parked along the curb, the bar sign glowing yellow. I checked my phone. Ryan had sent one more message telling me he grabbed a table near the back wall. I walked in. The place smelled like fried food and beer. There were maybe 10 people inside. A couple near the bar. 2 guys watching a game on the TV. Nothing unusual. Then I saw the table. 3 men were sitting there. At first I thought I had the wrong spot, but they were all looking at me like they had been waiting. And the weird part was they looked exactly the same. Same short dark hair, same face. Same crooked smile. Same gray jacket from the profile photo. 3 Ryans. I actually stopped walking for a second because my brain needed time to catch up. I thought maybe they were brothers or something. Triplets maybe. But that still didn't explain the Tinder profile. One of them lifted a hand slightly like he recognized me. The other 2 did the same thing almost at the same time. That's when the feeling started creeping in. They all leaned forward like they were studying my reaction. Not laughing. Not joking. Just watching. I walked over slowly because turning around and running would have felt ridiculous in a crowded bar. Up close it was worse. Their faces were identical. Not similar. Identical. Same tiny scar near the chin. Same faint line above the eyebrow. Even their posture looked the same. My brain kept trying to find differences, but there weren't any. Then one of them slid a phone across the table toward me. It was open to Tinder. My Tinder conversation. Another one tapped his own phone and showed the exact same conversation. Then the third did the same. All 3 phones had my profile open. None of them spoke, but they didn't need to. The message was obvious. Each of them was claiming to be the guy I matched with. My stomach dropped. At first I thought it was some elaborate prank. Maybe a group of friends messing with people from dating apps. But something about the way they watched me felt wrong. Too serious. Too focused. One of them pointed toward the wall behind the bar. There was an old clock hanging there. 11:17 p.m. Then he slowly held up one finger, then pointed at me. The meaning settled in my head like cold water. I had to choose. Pick which one was the real Ryan. The others nodded slightly like they all agreed on the rules. Still no one spoke. I sat down because standing there felt worse. Up close, I started searching for details. Anything. A difference in their eyes. A scar. A wrinkle. Something. Nothing. They looked like 3 copies from the same person. I tried remembering the photos from the profile. Maybe the angle of his smile. Maybe the way his hair sat. But my memory felt useless. The one on the left leaned back casually like he wasn't worried. The middle one rested his hands on the table calmly. The one on the right tilted his head slightly. All normal human movements, but perfectly matched faces. The clock ticked loudly behind me. 11:24. People in the bar kept doing their normal things. Drinking. Laughing. Watching the game. No one paid attention to our table. I looked at their phones again. Same conversation. Same photos. Same everything. Then the middle one flipped his phone around and showed me something new. A photo of me walking into the bar about 10 minutes earlier. Taken from across the room. My chest tightened. The left one showed a similar photo. The right one too. 3 angles of the same moment. They had been waiting long before I walked in. My brain started spinning through possibilities. Maybe identical triplets who shared a Tinder account. Maybe some weird social test. Maybe something worse. The clock hit 11:38. One of them pointed at the clock again, then at me. I understood. Time mattered. So I started paying attention to small things. The left one tapped his fingers in a pattern. The middle one watched me without blinking much. The right one kept glancing at the door. Maybe nerves. Maybe habits. Maybe clues. I tried to think about the conversation earlier. He mentioned working at the marina. Boats. Water. I looked at their hands. The middle one had faint marks on his fingers like small rope burns. The other two had smooth hands. That felt real. I stared at him longer. He noticed and slowly nodded once. The clock said 11:52. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it. I pointed at the middle one. For a second, nothing happened. Then the other two stood up at the same time. Their faces didn't change. Still, that same crooked smile. They walked past me toward the door. When they passed under the light near the entrance, something strange happened. Their faces looked slightly wrong for a split second, like a reflection moving in water. Then they were gone. Just like that. The middle one stayed seated. He leaned forward and finally spoke quietly, thanking me for choosing correctly. His voice matched the guy from my imagination during the chat. Normal. Calm. But I couldn't relax. Because as he reached for his drink, I noticed something that made my stomach drop all over again. His hands. The rope marks were gone. The skin looked smooth. Exactly like the other two. And the clock behind him hit midnight. I didn't think a normal dinner could turn into something that would keep me awake for weeks, but that's exactly what happened. What still bothers me is how normal the night started. Nothing dramatic. No weird messages. No strange photos. Just a regular Tinder match and a simple plan to get food. The worst part is if I had swiped left instead of right, none of it would have happened. Her name was Chloe. At least, that's what the profile said. The pictures looked normal. Nothing flashy. One photo at a lake, one sitting in a coffee shop, one with a dog that looked like it had zero interest in being in the picture. Her bio said she liked late-night food and road trips. That was it. I matched with her on a Sunday night while laying on my couch watching random videos. It was raining outside, and I remember thinking I should probably stop scrolling and go to sleep. Then the match popped up. She messaged first. The conversation was easy. It felt natural, like texting someone you already kind of knew. We talked about stupid things like the worst fast food places and how half the profiles on Tinder look exactly the same. She joked about people who take photos with fish they caught. I joked about people who post 10 gym selfies. It felt relaxed. No weird vibe at all. After maybe a day of messaging, she suggested grabbing dinner at this small place downtown called Brick Alley Grill. I had been there once before. It was one of those places with old brick walls, dim lights, and tables really close together so you could hear other people's conversations if they talked too loud. Nothing fancy, but it was always busy. We planned for Friday night. I remember driving there and thinking it would probably just be a normal date. Eat food, talk a little, maybe never see each other again. That's how most of these things go. When I walked in, she was already sitting at a table near the back. I recognized her right away from the pictures. Same long brown hair, same calm smile. She looked exactly like her profile, which already put me at ease. The restaurant was packed and loud in a comfortable way. Plates clinking, people laughing, waiters moving around quickly. I sat down and everything felt normal. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation flowed easily. We talked about where we grew up, the jobs we had, dumb high school stories. Nothing strange. If anything, she seemed more organized than most people I meet, like the type who keeps everything planned out. She mentioned she worked remotely doing some kind of data job. Something with numbers and reports. I remember thinking that made sense. Then about halfway through dinner, something odd happened. She pulled out her laptop. Not a phone, an actual laptop. At first, I thought maybe she had to check something for work quickly. People do that sometimes. But she opened it slowly and placed it on the table like this was completely normal for a dinner date. The screen lit up and I saw rows of boxes. Like a spreadsheet. She typed for a second, then looked up at me with the same calm smile. That's when she casually mentioned something that completely threw me off. She said she had been on 86 Tinder dates this year. Not over several years, just this year. It was only early October. I remember doing the math in my head. That was almost 2 dates every week. She said it in such a relaxed way that it took a second for it to register. Like someone mentioning they had been to 86 coffee shops. Then she turned the laptop slightly so I could see the screen better. The spreadsheet had a long list of names going down the side. Dozens of them. Every row had numbers next to it in different columns. There were categories. Conversation, punctuality, humor, honesty, appearance. Each one had a score. Some had notes next to them too. Short comments. Things like talked too much about crypto or kept checking phone. I remember feeling weird looking at it because it felt like I was staring at something personal that I shouldn't be seeing. Then she scrolled down the list. More names appeared. Row after row. I realized those were all the people she had gone out with. 86 of them. Then she clicked on the bottom row. A blank line. She typed my name into it. Watching someone add your name to a list like that during dinner is a strange feeling. It's like suddenly realizing you're part of something you didn't agree to. She started filling in a few boxes slowly while still talking about normal things. Conversation got a number. Punctuality got another. She paused for a second while looking at me like she was analyzing something, then typed again. I laughed at first because I thought it was a joke. Some kind of weird organizational habit. But she kept working on it. Every few minutes she glanced at the screen and typed another small note. It started to feel uncomfortable. Not because of the scoring exactly, but because of how detailed it was. There were timestamps. Comments about what the person ordered. Whether they opened the door. She had recorded everything. At one point she scrolled further down and I saw older rows that had red boxes next to them. I asked what those meant. She said those were the ones who got blocked after the date. Apparently, there were quite a few. The weird part was how serious she seemed about the whole system. Like it wasn't a joke or a hobby. It looked like a project. She explained that it helped her track patterns. Which type of guys tended to lie? Which ones talked about themselves too much? Which ones disappeared after the first date? She said data always tells the truth. While she was explaining all of this, she kept adding notes next to my name. The laptop screen reflected in her eyes while she typed. The restaurant noise suddenly felt louder. I tried to play it off like it was funny, but the more I looked at that spreadsheet, the stranger it felt. Because some of the notes were very specific. One row mentioned the exact time someone checked their phone. Another listed how long the date lasted down to the minute. Some of the red marked rows had longer comments that looked almost like small reports. I noticed something else too. At the far right of the spreadsheet, there was a column labeled Follow Up. Some rows had green marks. Some had red. Most were blank. I asked what that meant. She said green meant second date potential. Red meant never again. Blank meant still evaluating. While she said that, she slowly moved the cursor over to my row again. Then she started typing another note. Something about body language. That's when I started feeling like I was being studied. Like I wasn't really on a date. I was part of some ongoing test. She kept smiling normally and talking about everyday things while adding more details to the spreadsheet. At one point, she even scrolled back up to compare my row with someone from earlier in the year. She looked back and forth between the two lines like she was analyzing data points. Then she nodded slightly to herself. I remember noticing the number at the top of the sheet. 86 entries before mine. Mine was 87. That's when another weird thing hit me. If she had gone on 86 dates already this year, that meant she had been meeting new people constantly. Different restaurants, different guys, and recording all of them. I started wondering how many of them even knew they were being logged like this. Halfway through the meal, she added another column score. Then she highlighted my row in light yellow. She didn't explain that part. She just kept typing notes. Eventually, the food was finished, and she closed the laptop like nothing unusual had happened. The rest of the night continued almost normally. We talked about movies and travel and random internet stuff. If someone walked by our table, they would think it was just a regular date. But I couldn't stop thinking about that spreadsheet. All those names. All those scores. And the way she added mine while watching me. When the bill came, I paid, and we walked outside. The street was quiet and cold. We said goodbye, and she smiled like everything had gone perfectly fine. Later that night, I checked Tinder again. Her profile was gone. Not unmatched. Just completely gone. A few days later, I was telling a friend about the whole thing, and I tried to look her up again just to show the profile. But there was nothing. The only proof that night even happened was the restaurant receipt in my wallet. And the fact that somewhere on someone's laptop, row 87 probably still has my name on it. I knew the date was going to be weird before I even got in the car with him. Not scary weird at first. Just the kind of weird that makes you think maybe you should pretend you suddenly feel sick and go home. The problem is I ignored that thought because everything else about him seemed completely normal. That's honestly what bothers me now. Nothing about his profile warned me. His name was Daniel. His photos were simple. One picture sitting on the hood of an old car, one standing near a lake, another holding a cup of coffee like every other guy on Tinder. His bio was short and kind of funny. It said he liked quiet places more than crowded ones, and that he knew the best hidden spots around town. I matched with him on a Wednesday night while I reading through messages I had ignored all week. He seemed polite right away. No weird comments, no strange questions, just normal conversation. We talked about movies first, then music, then random stuff about the town we both live in. It felt comfortable, like texting someone you already knew from school or something. After a few days, he suggested we meet. Instead of dinner, he said he wanted to show me his favorite scenic spot. He said most people in town didn't even know about it, and the view was amazing at night. I asked where it was, and he just said it was a short drive outside town. I remember thinking it sounded kind of interesting. I had been on enough boring dinner dates already. Something different felt like a nice change. So we planned to meet Saturday evening. He picked me up around 7. His car was older but clean. The inside smelled like pine air freshener, and the radio was playing low. Everything felt normal. He seemed a little quiet, but not in a creepy way. Just calm. We drove through town for a few minutes making small talk. Then he turned onto a road I didn't use very often. The buildings slowly disappeared and trees started lining both sides of the street. The sky was already getting darker and the streetlights were spaced farther apart out there. I asked how far the place was, and he said it wasn't far at all. The road curved through a small wooded area and the houses became less common. Eventually, we passed the last gas station and kept going. At that point, I figured the scenic spot was probably some overlook or hill nearby. The town sits close to a river, and there are a few places where you can see the water from above. But after another few minutes, he turned onto a smaller road that I definitely didn't recognize. The pavement got rough and narrow. Tall trees leaned over the road like they were closing in. That was when I saw the metal gate. It was open, but old and slightly bent. There was a sign next to it. A cemetery. For a second, I thought maybe he had made a wrong turn. But he drove right through the gate without slowing down. The car headlights swept across rows of gravestones. Long rows. Some looked new and polished. Others leaned slightly like they had been there for a long time. I looked over at him expecting him to realize the mistake, but he didn't react at all. He parked near the center of the graveyard like this was exactly where he meant to be. The engine turned off and everything went quiet except for the sound of insects in the grass. That's when he told me this was the scenic spot. At first I thought he was joking, but he stepped out of the car and motioned for me to follow him. The moon was bright enough to see most of the cemetery. The place was bigger than I expected. Old stone markers spread across a wide hill with trees around the edges. The air felt colder there. He walked between the graves slowly like he had done it 100 times. Then he stopped at the first gravestone and brushed some dirt off the top. He stood there for a moment like he was remembering something. Then he introduced me to the name carved into the stone. Not in a joking way. Not like someone trying to scare their date. He acted completely serious. He told me a few details about the person buried there. Their name, their age, the year they died. Then he walked to another grave a few feet away and did the same thing again. Another name. Another small story. It felt strange standing there while he calmly went from grave to grave like he was introducing me to people at a party. At first I thought maybe he just liked history. Some people are really interested in local stories and old places. But the longer we walked, the stranger it got. He knew way too much about each grave. Dates, family names, small details about their lives. He didn't check his phone or anything. He just knew it. One gravestone belonged to someone who died in the 1940s. Another from the early 1900s. He spoke about them like they were old friends. We walked deeper into the cemetery, and he kept introducing me to more names. Some graves were cracked and worn from time. Others looked newer with fresh flowers nearby. Every time he stopped, he explained something about the person. What they used to do for work. How they died. Where they used to live. After maybe 15 minutes of walking, I realized something odd. Some of the graves he showed me were from very recent years. People who had died only a few months earlier, but he still talked about them the same way. Like he had known them personally. Eventually, we reached a small area near the back of the cemetery where the graves were spaced farther apart. The grass there looked slightly disturbed in a few places. He stopped at one grave that didn't even have a proper stone yet. Just a temporary marker stuck into the ground. He brushed the dirt off it carefully. Then he introduced me to that name too. While he was standing there, I noticed something else. Next to the marker was a small notebook lying in the grass. He picked it up casually and flipped it open. Inside were pages filled with writing. Names. Dates. Notes. Dozens of them. It looked like a list. He turned a few pages while standing under the moonlight, and I could see the same pattern repeating. Name. Date of death. Small details next to each one. Some of the names matched the gravestones we had already passed. Then he flipped to a blank page near the back. He held the pen above it for a moment like he was thinking about what to write. That's when I noticed another disturbing detail. The last entry in the notebook was only a few weeks old. Someone who had died recently. But I remembered walking past that grave earlier. The marker looked newer than the others. He closed the notebook slowly and slipped it back into his jacket pocket. Then he started walking again deeper into the cemetery. At that point, I didn't want to keep following him anymore. The place suddenly felt too quiet. Too empty. He kept stopping at different graves, brushing dirt away, and introducing me to more names like they were part of his friend group. The weirdest part was how calm he looked. Not joking. Not acting creepy on purpose. Just relaxed. Like this was the most normal date idea in the world. Eventually, I told him I wanted to head back to the car. He nodded like that was completely fine. We walked back the same path through the rows of gravestones. The car headlights were the only bright thing in the entire place. When we finally got inside and drove out through the cemetery gate, the town lights looked way brighter than before. He dropped me off at home a little later. The whole drive back, he acted like the night had gone perfectly normal. After I got inside my house, I sat on my bed thinking about that notebook. All those names. All those dates. And the way he introduced each grave like it belonged to someone he knew personally. A few days later, curiosity got the best of me. I went online and looked up the cemetery records. I started searching for the names I remembered from the gravestones. Almost all of them were real people who had been buried there over the last 100 years. But one name stood out. The last name he had written in the notebook. The one from a few weeks earlier. According to the local news article I found, the person had died in an accident. And the strange part was the location. The accident happened only a few miles from that cemetery. Late at night. On the same road Daniel drove me down. The thing that messes with me the most is how normal the night started. If you look at the beginning of it, nothing stands out. Just another match, another conversation, another plan to meet somewhere for food. If someone told me the story without the ending, I probably wouldn't even remember it. That's what makes it worse now. The weird parts didn't show up right away. They slowly slid in piece by piece, until I realized I was sitting across from someone who somehow knew things about my life that almost nobody talks about anymore. It started on a random Monday night when I was lying on my couch scrolling through Tinder out of pure boredom. I had already swiped through what felt like half the city, and most profiles were starting to blend together. Same photos, same captions, same recycled jokes. Then I matched with a girl named Laura. Her profile looked pretty normal. A few pictures at different places. One near a lake, one at some outdoor market, one sitting on a wooden fence with a sunset behind her. Her bio said she liked road trips and quiet coffee shops, and that she recently moved to town. That last part is important. Because if she had lived here longer, maybe I would have assumed she knew someone who knew me. But she clearly said she was new. We started messaging right away. The conversation was easy. Not one of those awkward back and forth things where both people run out of things to say. She seemed funny and relaxed. We talked about the city and which places were worth checking out. Since she was new, I told her about a few food spots and parks. Everything felt normal. After a couple days, she suggested meeting for dinner at a place called Maple Street Diner. It's one of those small late-night diners that stays open almost all the time. Bright lights, booths, old jukebox near the wall. Nothing fancy, but everyone in town knows it. We agreed to meet there Friday evening. When I got there, the parking lot was already half full. Inside the diner, people were talking loudly and plates were clinking around like usual. The smell of burgers and fries filled the place. She was already sitting in one of the booths near the window. She looked exactly like her photos. Same dark hair, same relaxed smile. She waved when she saw me walk in. The first part of the date was completely normal. We ordered food, talked about work, talked about the city. She asked questions like anyone would when meeting someone for the first time. But then something small happened that caught my attention. While we were talking about pets growing up, she casually mentioned the name Buddy. Buddy was the name of my childhood dog. For a second, I'd assumed I must have mentioned it earlier while texting. I didn't remember doing that, but conversations blur together sometimes. So I didn't think much about it at first. But a few minutes later, she mentioned my old school. Not my college. My elementary school. The one I went to when I was like 8 years old. That made me pause. Because that information definitely wasn't on my Tinder profile, and I had never mentioned it in our messages. At first, I tried to explain it logically in my head. Maybe she looked me up online somehow. Maybe there was an old post somewhere that mentioned it. But then she casually mentioned another detail. The name of my ex-girlfriend from years ago. Not someone recent. Someone I dated when I was 17. The kind of relationship that only people from that time in my life would remember. That's when the weird feeling started. I remember sitting there staring at my fries trying to figure out how she could possibly know that. My social media doesn't even have photos from that far back anymore. I deleted most of that stuff years ago. But she kept bringing up little things. Not in a creepy way either. She mentioned them like they were just normal conversation topics, like she already knew them so there was no reason to question it. She talked about the neighborhood I grew up in, the park near my old house, even the name of the teacher I had in 4th grade. At that point, my brain was racing trying to connect the dots. Maybe we had met before somehow, and I just didn't remember her. But that didn't make sense. She clearly said she had moved here recently. Then she mentioned something that really made my stomach drop. She brought up a story about my childhood dog Buddy getting stuck under our porch one summer. That wasn't something anyone outside my family knew about. It happened when I was maybe 10 years old. Buddy chased a rabbit and crawled under the wooden porch behind our house. He got trapped there for hours, and my dad had to remove a few boards to get him out. It wasn't a public story. It wasn't online. It was just a random memory from my childhood. Yet she somehow knew it. At that point, I started scanning her face trying to figure out if she was messing with me somehow. But she looked completely calm, just sitting there eating fries and smiling like the conversation was perfectly normal. I asked her how she knew all of that. She didn't give a real explanation. She just shrugged slightly and said she had always been good at finding information about people. Then she took a sip of her drink and started mentioning even more details. The summer camp I went to when I was 12. The name of the street my grandparents used to live on. The first car I drove in high school. None of that was online anywhere. At least not that I knew of. The more she talked, the more uncomfortable I felt. It was like sitting across from someone who had read my entire life story somehow. But she didn't act threatening. If anything, she seemed amused by my reaction. At one point, she even mentioned a scar on my arm from when I fell off my bike as a kid. That scar is small and mostly faded now. You can barely notice it unless you're looking closely. I hadn't even realized she noticed it. After dinner, we walked outside into the parking lot. The air was cooler, and the streetlights buzzed quietly above us. She stood there smiling like the night had gone great. Before leaving, she mentioned one last thing. She said my dog Buddy had lived a good life. The way she said it felt strange. Not like someone repeating something they read online. More like someone remembering it. I went home after that feeling completely confused. The first thing I did was check my social media accounts to see if any of that information was visible somewhere. Nothing. No mention of Buddy. No mention of my old school. No mention of my ex from high school. The next day, I tried searching her name online. Laura. The same name from her Tinder profile. But I couldn't find anything connected to the photos she used. No accounts. No tagged photos. Nothing. Then something even stranger happened. A few days later, I was going through an old box in my closet looking for a charger. Inside that box were a bunch of childhood photos my parents gave me years ago. One of the pictures showed me sitting on the porch with Buddy. I stared at that photo for a long time because something in the background looked familiar. There was another kid standing in the yard behind me. A girl. She looked around the same age I was back then. At first, I thought it was just one of the neighborhood kids I forgot about. But the more I stared at the picture, the more something about her face looked familiar. Then it hit me. The girl in that photo looked exactly like Laura. Same eyes. Same smile. The photo was taken over 15 years ago. But the face in the background was unmistakable. After noticing that, I went back through the rest of the photos in the box. In 3 more pictures, the same girl appeared somewhere in the background, standing near the sidewalk, sitting on a swing at the park, watching from across the street, always far enough away that I never noticed before, but always there. And now I couldn't stop thinking about something she said during dinner. She mentioned she had always been good at finding information about people. I wish I had left when he asked about my blood type. That sounds dramatic when I say it now, but at the time it didn't feel like a giant warning sign. It just felt like a random weird question that people sometimes ask when they run out of things to talk about. The problem is it didn't stop there. The questions kept coming, and each one got a little more specific than the last. Looking back now, the entire night feels like I slowly walked into something strange without noticing until it was already too late. I matched with him on Tinder on a Tuesday night while I was lying on my bed, scrolling through profiles like usual. His name was Aaron. His pictures looked normal. One photo hiking somewhere with mountains behind him. Another standing in a kitchen holding a pan like he was proud of cooking something. His bio said he liked making food for people and that cooking was his favorite hobby. At the time, it actually sounded nice. Most guys on there either say nothing or write one sentence about going to the gym. Someone who liked cooking seemed different in a good way. We started messaging that same night. The conversation felt easy right away. He asked normal questions at first. Where I worked, what kind of food I liked, which restaurants in town were overrated. A lot of the conversation ended up being about food. He talked about different recipes he liked making and how he spent a lot of time experimenting in the kitchen. It sounded kind of interesting, actually. I'm not a great cook myself, so the idea of someone making dinner sounded like a good deal. After a few days, he suggested we meet. Instead of going out somewhere, he offered to cook dinner at his place. Normally, I might say no to that idea on a first date, but we had been talking enough that it didn't feel too risky. He seemed polite and normal in every message. So I agreed. His apartment was across town in a newer building near the river. When I got there, the sun was already setting and the sky looked orange over the water. The building itself looked nice and quiet. Nothing sketchy. He opened the door before I even knocked like he had been watching the hallway. In person, he looked exactly like his photos. Same short hair, same friendly smile. The apartment smelled like garlic and something cooking already. The place was really clean too, almost too clean. His kitchen counter was completely organized. Every utensil in neat rows, ingredients lined up in small bowls like a cooking show. He seemed excited to cook and started explaining what he was making. Some kind of pasta with a homemade sauce. At first, everything felt normal. We talked about random things while he cooked. Work, movies, places in town. The usual stuff. Then, while chopping vegetables, he asked a random question. He wanted to know my blood type. The question came out of nowhere, but I laughed and told him I didn't actually remember. I said it was probably on some medical form somewhere, but I had never really paid attention. He nodded slowly like that answer was important somehow. Then he asked if I had any allergies. That one made more sense since he was cooking dinner. I told him I didn't have any serious ones. Just a mild reaction to shellfish, but nothing extreme. He wrote something down on a small notepad sitting near the stove. At the time, I thought maybe it was part of the recipe or grocery list. But then the questions kept coming. He asked if anyone in my family had major health issues. Then he asked if I had ever needed surgery. Then he asked about medications I might take regularly. Each question came while he was calmly stirring the sauce or cutting something on the counter. The strange part was how focused he looked while asking them. Like he was gathering information for something. I tried to laugh it off and said he was asking a lot of medical questions for someone making pasta. He smiled and said he just liked knowing details about people. That answer didn't really explain much. While the pasta cooked, he opened the refrigerator to grab something. That's when I noticed the containers. There were several clear plastic boxes stacked neatly on one shelf. Each one had labels with names written on them. At first I'd assumed they were meal prep containers. But when he pulled one out, I realized it wasn't food. Inside the container were small sealed vials. Dark red liquid. He placed the container back quickly like it wasn't something worth explaining. I didn't ask about it right away because I thought maybe I'd misunderstood what I saw. But a few minutes later, while he was cutting herbs, he asked another strange question. He wanted to know if I donated blood before. That's when my brain went back to the vials in the refrigerator. I asked what those containers were. He answered casually while stirring the sauce again. He said they were samples. The way he said it sounded completely normal to him. Like everyone kept random samples in their kitchen fridge. Then he started talking about blood types again. Different compatibility groups. How rare certain types are. He seemed really interested in the topic. While he was explaining all that, I noticed the notepad again on the counter. This time, I leaned slightly to see what he had written earlier. It wasn't a grocery list. It was a list of names. Under each name were small notes. Blood type. Allergies. Dates. My stomach tightened when I realized what it looked like. It looked like a record. Like he had been collecting information about multiple people. While I was staring at the page, he casually added my name to the bottom of the list. Then he left the blood type section blank. He tapped the pen against the paper for a second like he was thinking about something. The pasta finished cooking soon after, and he served it like nothing unusual had happened. We sat down at the small table near the kitchen window. The food actually smelled really good. But I couldn't stop thinking about the refrigerator and that list. He kept asking small health-related questions while we ate. Nothing dramatic. Just little details. If I had ever fainted before. If I knew my iron levels. If I got dizzy easily. Each question made the night feel stranger. At one point, he stood up to grab something from the kitchen again. While he was gone, I glanced at the refrigerator door. There was a small magnet board attached to it. On the board were several tiny labels with blood types written on them. A positive. O negative. B positive. Some had check marks next to them. Some didn't. When he came back with another plate, he seemed to notice where I was looking. He smiled again, but didn't explain anything. Dinner finished, and he started washing dishes like the night was completely normal. I told him I needed to leave soon because I had an early morning. He nodded politely and walked me to the door. Before I stepped into the hallway, he asked one last question. He wanted to know if I had ever had a blood test recently. I said no and left. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the refrigerator and those containers. Later that week, curiosity got the better of me, and I searched his name online. It didn't take long to find something. A news article from a few years earlier. It mentioned a medical lab investigation involving stolen blood samples. One of the technicians named in the article was Aaron. There is a photo of me somewhere on a stranger's phone that I never agreed to. I know that sounds normal at first because people take pictures on dates all the time. The weird part is I'm almost certain that photo is sitting in a long line of photos that all look the same. Same table, same seat, same background, just different guys sitting where I was sitting. I only saw the gallery for a few seconds, but that was enough. It started like any other Tinder date. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that screamed warning sign. I matched with her on a random Thursday night while scrolling through profiles out of boredom. Her name was Nina. Her photos looked normal. A couple pictures in cafes, one outside a bookstore, another standing near a bridge downtown. Her bio was short. It said she liked trying new restaurants and that she always picked the dessert first. It sounded simple and kind of funny. We started messaging that same night. The conversation felt easy. She replied quickly, and didn't do that thing where people vanish for hours. We talked about food mostly. Favorite pizza places, overrated chains, small restaurants nobody knows about. At one point she mentioned a place called Cedar Table. I had heard of it, but never been there. Apparently it was a small restaurant tucked between two shops downtown. She said it was quiet and good for talking. We agreed to meet there Saturday evening. The place was easy to find but smaller than I expected. From outside it almost looked like a coffee shop. Soft yellow lights in the windows and a small wooden sign hanging above the door. Inside it was cozy. Brick walls, wooden tables, maybe 10 booths total. The kind of place where people talk quietly and the music stays low. She was already there when I arrived. She sat in the booth along the far wall near a tall window. When she waved, I noticed right away that she looked exactly like her pictures. Same dark hair and calm smile. The booth across from her was empty, so I slid in. The restaurant smelled like baked bread and garlic. People were talking softly around us, and a waiter walked by carrying plates of pasta. Everything felt completely normal. The first part of the date went really well, actually. We talked about travel, movies, and weird jobs we had before our current ones. She had a good sense of humor and laughed easily. At one point, she even pointed out how the booth we were sitting in was her favorite seat in the entire restaurant. She said she always tried to sit there. I didn't think much about that at the time. Some people just have a favorite table at certain places. Our food came, and the conversation kept flowing. Nothing awkward. After about an hour, the plates were mostly empty, and the waiter cleared the table. That's when she pulled out her phone. She said she liked remembering nights like this with photos. Again, that didn't seem strange. People take pictures all the time now. She leaned closer to the table and asked if I wanted to take a picture together. I agreed because it felt harmless. She opened her phone camera, but then paused for a second. Instead of the camera app, the screen showed her photo gallery. I only noticed because the brightness of the screen reflected slightly on the table between us. And what I saw there made my stomach tighten immediately. The gallery was filled with pictures of men. Dozens of them. At first, I thought maybe they were just random friends or social pictures. But then I noticed something very specific. Every photo looked almost identical. Each man was sitting in the same booth. The exact booth I was sitting in. Same wooden table. Same brick wall behind them. Same small lamp hanging from the ceiling above. Different guys. Different shirts. Different hairstyles. But the same seat. I stared at the screen for a second longer than I should have. That's when I noticed something else. Some of the photos were clearly taken months apart. In one picture, a guy wore a thick winter jacket. In another, someone had short sleeves like it was summer. But the background never changed. Always the same booth. Always the same angle. Always the man sitting where I was sitting. She quickly switched to the camera after that, but by then my brain was already spinning. While we leaned closer for the photo, I kept thinking about that gallery. It looked like a collection. Not random pictures. A pattern. After the photo was taken, she looked at it and smiled, satisfied. Then she went back into the gallery again to save it. This time I saw more of the images while she scrolled. There were way more than I first thought. Row after row. Different guys. Same booth. Some of them were smiling. Some looked confused. Some looked like they didn't even realize a picture was being taken. My eyes followed the background details. The small crack in the brick wall behind the seat. The tiny scratch in the wooden table near the corner. Every photo had those exact details. That's when the realization hit me. All those pictures were taken in this exact seat. The same one I was sitting in right now. She scrolled down and added the new photo of us to the gallery. It appeared at the top of the list. My face now part of the collection. She locked the phone and placed it on the table like nothing unusual had happened. The conversation continued for a few minutes after that, but I barely paid attention. My brain kept replaying the gallery images. There had to be at least 50 photos. Maybe more. All different guys. All sitting here. Eventually, the waiter brought the bill. I offered to pay, and she didn't argue. We stepped outside into the cool evening air after dinner. The streetlights lit up the sidewalk and cars passed slowly on the road. She seemed completely relaxed. Before we went separate directions, she mentioned she loved nights like this. She said it was always nice meeting someone new. The way she said always stuck in my head. I walked back to my car thinking about that booth. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I went back to Cedar Table around lunchtime. The place was quieter during the day. I asked for the same booth. The waiter didn't think twice about it and showed me to the exact seat I had used the night before. While sitting there, I looked around more carefully. The brick wall. The hanging lamp. The small scratch in the table. Everything matched the photos I saw. Then something else caught my attention. Under the edge of the table, near where someone sitting across would face the seat I was in, there were faint carved marks in the wood. Names. Dozens of them. Some carved lightly. Some deeper. Most looked like male names. Different handwriting styles. Some older and faded. Some newer. They weren't carved randomly. They were lined up in small rows, like someone had been adding them one by one. I ran my finger over one of the newer carvings. The letters were rough but clear. A guy's name. The same name I remembered seeing in one of the photos in her gallery. When the waiter came back to refill my drink, I asked casually how long that booth had been there. He said as long as the restaurant had been open. Then he mentioned something else. He said a lot of people liked that seat. Especially one woman who came in pretty often. He said she usually sat in the same spot every time. Across from the same booth seat. The one I was sitting in. I didn't stay long after hearing that. But before leaving, I looked under the table one more time. At the bottom row of carved names, there was a fresh, empty space. Just enough room for another one. I didn't leave the date because he had a wife. I left because of the way he answered the phone. If he had panicked or looked embarrassed or even tried to hide it, I probably would have just rolled my eyes and walked out like anyone would. But that's not what happened. What happened felt so casual and normal that it took my brain a few seconds to realize how wrong it was. The strange part is the night actually started off pretty good. I matched with him on Tinder on a random Sunday afternoon while I was sitting in a coffee shop trying to pretend I reading something on my laptop. His name was Chris. His profile was simple but kind of funny. One picture of him standing next to a huge sandwich he looked proud of, another picture hiking somewhere with trees behind him. His bio said he liked bad movies and late-night food runs. Nothing unusual. We started messaging later that day, and the conversation moved fast. He seemed relaxed and easy to talk to. We joked about terrible movies we had watched recently and weird things people write in their profiles. The thing I noticed about him early on was how confident he sounded. Not in an arrogant way, just comfortable. After a few days, he suggested meeting in person. Instead of dinner, he suggested a place called Harbor Arcade. It's a small spot near the waterfront with old arcade machines, pinball tables, and a small bar inside. People go there mostly to play games and hang out. I actually liked the idea because it sounded more interesting than sitting across a table asking the same questions every date has. So we planned to meet Friday evening. When I arrived, the place was already buzzing with noise. The sound of arcade machines, people laughing, the clinking of glasses from the small bar near the back. Neon lights from the machines flashed across the walls. He was standing near one of the pinball machines when I walked in. He recognized me right away and waved. In person, he looked exactly like his photos. Same messy hair and relaxed smile. The first hour of the date felt fun. We played a few games together. Old racing machines and a basketball shooting game. He was surprisingly competitive, but in a joking way. We grabbed drinks from the bar and sat at a small high table near the corner where we could still see the arcade floor. The music was loud, but not overwhelming. We talked about work and hobbies and random childhood stories. He seemed like someone who had a lot of funny memories to share. At one point, he told a story about getting locked inside a movie theater after a late showing when he was younger. It was the kind of story that made you laugh because it sounded ridiculous. Everything felt normal. Then about halfway through the night, his phone started ringing. It was sitting face up on the table, so I saw the screen light up. At first, I didn't look closely. People get calls all the time. But he looked down at the screen and casually said something that made me pause immediately. He mentioned that his wife was calling. The way he said it wasn't awkward or nervous. It sounded completely normal. Almost like someone saying their friend or sister was calling. For a second, I thought I must have misunderstood. But then he picked up the phone and answered it right there at the table. No hesitation. No attempt to step away. He started talking like it was just another normal conversation. The thing that made it stranger was his tone. He sounded calm and casual, like someone talking to a partner they talk to every day. He even laughed at something the person on the other end said. I sat there holding my drink trying to process what was happening. The noise from the arcade machines filled the space between us while he continued the call. He didn't lower his voice or try to hide anything. After a minute or two, he ended the call and placed the phone back on the table. Then he went right back to the conversation we were having before, like nothing strange had happened. That's when the confusion really started settling in. I couldn't tell if he had made some kind of joke earlier or if he was actually married. He didn't look guilty or worried at all. If anything, he seemed slightly amused by my reaction. The rest of the conversation continued, but my brain kept circling back to that moment. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me and I asked about it. His explanation made the situation even stranger. He said he technically did have a wife, but he talked about it in a very calm way, like it was just a random fact about his life. He explained that they still live in the same house, but their relationship was complicated. He didn't say they were separated. He didn't say they were divorcing either. He just said things were different now. While he was explaining all this, his phone buzzed again on the table. Another call. The same name appeared on the screen. He answered it again without hesitation. This time, the conversation lasted longer. I couldn't hear the other side clearly because of the arcade noise, but I noticed something odd about the way he responded. He sounded slightly more serious, like he was trying to reassure someone about something. After he ended the call, he apologized briefly for the interruption. But the apology didn't feel very sincere. More like something he said out of habit. We decided to play another game to lighten the mood. While we walked across the arcade floor toward the racing machines, I noticed something strange about his phone again. The lock screen lit up when a message came in. The preview showed the same name as the calls. But under the name, there was a small heart symbol. The message looked short. But what caught my attention was the timestamp. It said the message was sent from inside the building. That confused me for a second, because the message arrived almost immediately after the call ended. Like the person sending it was extremely close. I tried to ignore it and focus on the game. But the thought stayed in the back of my mind. After another round of games, we went back to the table to finish our drinks. His phone stayed face up on the surface. A few minutes later, it rang again. Same name. This time, he hesitated for just a moment before answering. Still calm. Still casual. But when he spoke this time, his eyes briefly glanced toward the entrance of the arcade. That made me look over too. Standing near the doorway was a woman watching the room. She looked around slowly like she was searching for someone. The strange part was she didn't look angry or upset. Just focused. While he continued the call, his posture changed slightly. Not nervous exactly. More like someone waiting for something to happen. The woman near the entrance eventually started walking through the arcade. Machine lights flashed across her face as she passed different rows. Her eyes moved from table to table. Then she stopped. Right at the edge of our section. She looked directly at him. He ended the call and placed the phone down. For a few seconds, none of us moved. The noise from the arcade machines kept filling the room. Then he stood up slowly like he had been expecting this moment the entire night. The woman stepped closer. And that's when I realized something else. She wasn't looking at him with anger. She was looking at me. Something about the date felt wrong before I even realized why. At first, it was just a small feeling in the back of my head, like when you walk into a room and feel like you forgot something. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic. Just a weird sense that something about the conversation wasn't lining up the way it should. I didn't notice the pattern right away. It took a few moments that seemed small at first. Moments that didn't fully make sense until later when I replayed the entire night in my head. The strange part is if you look at the beginning of the date, it was completely normal. I matched with her on Tinder on a Wednesday night while sitting on my couch scrolling through profiles after work. Her name was Kayla. Her pictures looked pretty standard. One photo sitting on a rooftop somewhere with city lights behind her, another one holding a coffee cup in a cafe. Her bio said she liked random road trips and terrible horror movies. I remember thinking she looked friendly. We started messaging that same night. The conversation moved easily. No long pauses or awkward responses. We talked about movies first and then about food places around town. She mentioned a burger place I liked too, so the conversation kept going from there. Nothing about the messages felt strange. After a couple days, we decided to meet. Instead of dinner, she suggested grabbing milkshakes at a place called Silver Spoon Diner. It's an older diner outside the main downtown area. Neon sign, red boots, chrome edges on the tables. The kind of place that looks like it hasn't changed since the 80s. I agreed because it sounded easy and relaxed. When I got there, the neon sign was glowing bright red against the dark sky. Inside the diner, the lights were warm, and the place smelled like fries and syrup. A few families sat at tables near the windows while a couple of older guys talked near the counter. She was already sitting in a booth along the far wall. When I walked in, she looked up immediately and smiled like she recognized me right away. In person, she looked exactly like her photos. Same dark hair and relaxed expression. I slid into the booth across from her. The waitress came over and we ordered milkshakes. At first, the conversation felt completely normal. We talked about work and how boring weekdays can feel. She mentioned a funny story about getting stuck in traffic earlier that week. I started telling her about something similar that happened to me a few months ago. But right before I got to the part of the story that usually makes people laugh, she started laughing already. Not a small chuckle either. A full laugh like she had already heard the punchline. I paused for a second, confused. Then I finished the story anyway. The moment I reached the part that people normally laugh at, she laughed again. The exact same laugh. I'd assumed maybe she had just guessed where the story was going. So I didn't think much about it. The milkshakes arrived and we kept talking. A few minutes later, I started telling another small story about a camping trip with friends. Halfway through the setup, she smiled like she knew what was coming. Right before I got to the weird part where we got lost for an hour, she started laughing again. Not after the story. Before it. Like she was reacting to something I hadn't said yet. That's when the pattern started forming in my head. The next time it happened, I paid closer attention. I started telling a short story about a coworker who accidentally sent an embarrassing email to the entire office. It's a story I've told a few people before, and the timing is always the same. Right when I got close to the part where the mistake happens, she started laughing again. exactly 2 seconds before I said it. My brain stalled for a moment. I finished the story slowly while watching her face. She laughed again at the exact moment the story ended, like she was following a script she already knew. At that point, I started testing it without making it obvious. I began telling a random story about a grocery store trip, something small and boring, just to see if the same thing would happen. Right before I reached the slightly funny part about dropping a bag of oranges, she covered her mouth and started laughing. Again. Before the words left my mouth, my stomach tightened a little. It felt impossible to ignore now. Every time I started telling something, she reacted to it early. Not guessing. Not predicting. Reacting like she had already heard the exact story before. I tried switching topics completely. I started telling her about a road trip I took years ago. This story wasn't funny at all, just a weird memory about getting lost in a small town. Halfway through explaining it, she smiled and nodded slightly like she knew the ending. Then, right before I described how the gas station worker pointed me in the wrong direction, she laughed again. That made me stop talking for a moment. She looked at me with the same relaxed expression, like nothing strange had happened. We kept talking for another 20 minutes, but the pattern never stopped. Every story I told, every little joke, every random comment. She reacted to the punchline early. Not by a lot. Just a few seconds, but enough to make it obvious. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to try something different. Instead of telling a real story, I started making one up on the spot. Something ridiculous about getting chased by a goose in a park. I deliberately changed the details halfway through. Right before I switched the story toward the fake ending, she started laughing again. But this time, the timing was off. She laughed at a moment that didn't make sense anymore, because the ending I planned in my head had changed. She stopped laughing quickly when she realized the story didn't go the way she expected. That moment felt strange, like someone missing a cue. After that, the conversation slowed down a bit. We finished our milkshakes and eventually decided to leave. Outside the diner, the night air felt cooler and the parking lot lights buzzed quietly overhead. Before we walked to our cars, she pulled out her phone to check something. While she did that, I noticed the screen reflection briefly. A messaging app was open, but the strange part was the text above it. It looked like a long block of writing. Lines of text stacked one after another. At first, I thought maybe it was notes or something. But then I noticed something specific. One of the lines looked exactly like the story I told earlier about my coworker and the email. Word for word. Another line looked like the camping story. Another looked like the grocery store one. The exact sentences I had said earlier that night. She locked the phone quickly after that and slipped it into her pocket. We said goodbye and went to our cars. I drove home trying to figure out how she could possibly have those lines written down. Later, that night, curiosity got the best of me and I checked our Tinder conversation again. Scrolling back through the messages, I noticed something strange I hadn't noticed before. Earlier in the week, she had sent a long message late at night. At the time, I must have skimmed over it quickly. Now, when I read it carefully, I realized something. It wasn't a message. It was a list. A long list of sentences. Stories. Jokes. Random comments. The exact things I ended up saying during the date. I didn't notice it at first. Not right away. The weird part about this date is that everything looked completely normal for the first hour. I even remember thinking how easy it was to talk to him. How comfortable it felt. How much it reminded me of those random nights when you meet someone new and the conversation just flows without any effort. His name was Derek. I matched with him on Tinder one Tuesday evening while I was scrolling through my phone on the couch after a long day of work. His profile was surprisingly simple. One picture with him at a cafe, one outside with some sort of mountain behind him, and a selfie that looked like it had been taken on a train. His bio said he liked board games, bad science fiction, and late-night walks. I didn't think much of it, swiped right, and a few minutes later we matched. We started messaging that night. His messages were weirdly easy to respond to. Not trying too hard, not pretending to be someone he wasn't. He asked questions, not generic ones, but ones that actually made me think for a second before answering. He joked lightly about time travel in one of the first messages, and I laughed at the randomness. Later, he asked me directly if I believed in it. That stuck with me. We agreed to meet a few days later at this small cafe tucked into a side street I'd never noticed before. It was quiet, the kind of place that smelled faintly of coffee beans and old books, with yellowish light that made the place feel warmer than it probably should have at night. There were maybe 10 tables, all old wood, and a couple of cushioned chairs that looked like they'd been there for decades. When I arrived, he was already sitting at a table near the back, scribbling in what looked like a small notebook. At first, I didn't think much of it. People doodle, take notes, write ideas. Normal stuff. He smiled when I walked in, looked up briefly, and I slid into the chair across from him. We ordered drinks, me a chai latte, him a black coffee, and started talking. At first, it was the usual. Work, movies, what we did over the weekend. But then he asked me again, casually, if I believed in time travel. Not in a pushy way, more like an experiment. I laughed nervously, said maybe. He nodded, took a sip of coffee, and kept talking like it was nothing. We talked about other things after that, random stuff that usually comes up when two people meet for the first time. Favorite books, childhood memories, stupid embarrassing moments at school. The conversation was fluid, and I couldn't stop myself from getting drawn in. He had this calm way of listening, of waiting until I finished my story, nodding in the right spots, smiling at exactly the right moments. After about 45 minutes, I noticed the notebook sitting on the table. It was small, leather-bound, and looked worn. I had assumed it was just something he carried for doodles or notes. He didn't bring it up, didn't write anything while we talked. At least, I didn't notice him doing it. Then, when I went to tell a story about a stupid argument I had with my roommate over the thermostat, he suddenly flipped the notebook open toward me. And that's when I saw it. Our entire conversation, word for word. Every sentence I had said, every little detail, every joke, every pause I had made, written in his handwriting across the page. The lines were neat, careful, and exact. The words I had spoken were there in ink, like he had anticipated the entire conversation before it happened. Even the pauses were marked with small dots, as if he had timed them. I froze. My hands were on my cup, and I couldn't move them. I thought maybe I was imagining it, maybe my brain was playing tricks. But no. Every story I had told, the ones I hadn't finished, the ones I had barely started, were all there. Every question I had asked, even the stupid ones about the cafe decor, written down exactly as I had said them. He didn't say anything, just looked at me, calm, like it was completely normal. Like showing someone a notebook with their own words was no big deal. I couldn't speak. I wanted to ask him how he did it, why he had our conversation already written down, but my throat went dry. The cafe felt colder suddenly. The yellow lights looked dimmer. I kept glancing at the notebook, trying to find something that might explain it. A note on the side, a scribble, a date, a page number, anything. But there was nothing. Just the words. I tried to make sense of it logically. Maybe he wrote it during our text messages earlier in the week. Maybe he rehearsed what we would say. But no. The things he wrote weren't in our messages. They were the things I had said out loud while sitting here. Things I hadn't mentioned anywhere else. I had no idea how he could know them. At some point, I realized he hadn't even been writing while we talked. The pages were already open, already written, ready for me to see. And then the notebook clicked in my brain in a way that made my stomach turn. He knew every single word I was going to say. Every story, every pause, every laugh. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was some kind of elaborate joke, something creepy he did for fun. But it didn't feel like a joke. The way he smiled, calm and patient, made it feel like he was testing me, observing me, like this was normal for him. I remember trying to push back into casual conversation. I asked something about time travel again, casually, almost like a joke, trying to see if he had predicted that too. I hadn't spoken the thought yet, just moved it in my head, and I noticed him glance at the notebook. His smile tightened just slightly, enough for me to feel it. He flipped a few pages. There it was. The thought I hadn't even voiced yet, written down already. I had no words. I just stared at the pages, my latte growing cold in front of me. Eventually, he closed the notebook gently, put it aside, and leaned back in his chair. The way he did it was so casual, like nothing abnormal had happened. Like every first date with every person he ever met involved a notebook filled with words that hadn't been spoken yet. We finished our drinks in silence after that. I couldn't bring myself to say anything else. My entire brain was occupied with the fact that our conversation, every word I had said, was already there, written in ink. And the way he looked at me, calm and collected, made it clear he had planned this all along. Or maybe he didn't even plan it, and it had always been that way for him. When I left the cafe, I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out, feeling the notebook and every word I had said following me in my mind. The world outside felt too normal, the streetlights too bright, the air too clean. But I couldn't stop replaying it. Every sentence, every pause, every laugh I had said, every word he had already written down. I haven't matched with anyone else since. I haven't tried dating apps. I keep thinking about that notebook. About the way he knew every word before it happened. I don't know how he did it. I don't know if anyone else has been in that seat, at that table, with that notebook. But I know I don't want to find out. The weirdest part about the whole night didn't hit me until I was halfway down the street walking home, thinking over everything that happened. At first, it seemed like a normal first date. I mean, I had met people on Tinder before. Usually there's some awkward small talk, maybe a drink, maybe a walk somewhere public. But this one was completely off from the start, though I didn't realize it until too late. Her name was Leela. I matched with her on a Thursday afternoon while I was waiting for a friend who was running late at a cafe near my apartment. Her photos looked kind of normal. One of her with a guitar, one with a dog I didn't recognize, and another standing by what looked like a lake at sunset. Her bio said she liked urban exploring and board games. Nothing alarming. Nothing that set off red flags. We messaged for a couple of days. She was funny, witty in the kind of way that makes it easy to text for hours without noticing time. She joked about movies, TV shows, her week, random observations about the city. Nothing too strange at first, but then she suggested meeting in person. Instead of picking a cafe or a bar, she insisted she wanted to come to my place. At first, I hesitated. Meeting at someone's house on a first date always sets off alarms. But she claimed she had already been there before, that she liked the layout, and that she felt comfortable with it. My brain stalled for a second. I asked myself if I had ever mentioned my address anywhere, and I realized I hadn't. Not to her. Not on Tinder. Not in texts. Still, she sounded so casual about it that I shrugged and agreed. I figured maybe she meant she had been in the building before, some vague coincidence. I should have stopped right there. I live in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a quiet building. It's nothing special. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, a living area with a couch and some shelves. I went back that evening, tittied up a little, and waited for her. She arrived right on time. When she walked in, she smiled like she knew exactly where everything was. Not in a first-time glance way, but in a way that made it feel like she had lived there. She didn't hesitate, didn't look confused by the layout of the apartment, didn't ask where anything was. She went straight to the living room, and made herself comfortable on my couch. I kept my cool. I thought maybe she was just confident, or had good spatial memory, or had been here in someone else's apartment with a similar layout. We sat down and started talking. The conversation was easy at first. Movies, music, books, some jokes, minor stories about work. Nothing alarming. I even started to relax, thinking maybe my initial worry had been unnecessary. Then she started pointing out things. Small things. Noticing that I had a mug from a coffee shop in the corner I hadn't even used in weeks, that I had a particular picture frame tilted just slightly on a shelf, the pattern of the rug in the living room. I mentioned the mug in passing, that it had been a gift from a friend. She nodded knowingly. She didn't say anything, just nodded, almost like she already knew about it. The first really disturbing moment came when I went to get a drink from the kitchen. I had a bottle of sparkling water in the fridge. When I came back, she was already holding it, smiling. Not like a joke or a prank, like she had known I would get it. I laughed nervously. That was weird. But maybe I was overthinking. Then she started talking about the apartment. About what she liked in each room. About how she would arrange the furniture differently. About which walls she thought needed more color. It wasn't just strange advice. It was specific. Things only someone who had been there could know. Things I hadn't mentioned anywhere. Not to friends, not online, not in texts. My brain started racing. How could she know these things? I tried to laugh it off, kept making casual conversation, hoping to see if it was just luck or a coincidence. Then she brought up my bedroom. I froze. I hadn't shown it to anyone. I hadn't said anything about it. She mentioned that she liked the way the bed was positioned, that she noticed I had a certain painting above it, and that the light from the window made it feel cozy at night. My stomach dropped. There was no way she could have known. She noticed the change in my expression, but didn't comment. Just continued talking like it was nothing. We moved to the couch. I tried to redirect the conversation to movies, trying to pretend that I wasn't internally panicking. But even there, she somehow already knew what I was about to say. I mentioned a favorite film, and she smiled and nodded knowingly, referencing a line from the movie I hadn't even said out loud yet. I started looking around the apartment, trying to find anything that might explain it. Security cameras? Friends? Neighbors? Nothing. Nothing that could explain why she knew everything. The clock kept moving, the night felt heavier, and I realized I was trapped in a conversation where she seemed to know everything about the space I considered private. Every corner, every decoration, every small quirk. At one point, I excused myself to grab something from the kitchen. I needed to think, to breathe, to see if maybe this was all a game. When I came back, she had moved slightly, sitting where I normally placed my laptop when I worked, tracing her fingers across the table as if she had spent hours here before. I asked myself repeatedly how she could have known the layout so well. It didn't make sense. I had never invited her over before. I hadn't shown pictures. I hadn't even given vague hints in messages. Yet she spoke like she had lived here for weeks. Eventually, I realized she had memorized every detail. Or worse, she had been here. I tried to rationalize. Maybe she had a twin. Maybe someone else let her in once. Maybe it was a coincidence. None of it made sense. I started to panic quietly. I couldn't ask her directly. I couldn't admit I was scared. So I tried small talk again. I asked about her week, about her favorite spots in the city, just to steer the conversation away from the apartment. But every answer she gave had subtle references back to the space. Every story she told included descriptions that matched the angles of my walls, the placement of my furniture, the spacing of my shelves. I noticed the time. Hours had passed. My apartment, which had always felt safe and familiar, suddenly felt exposed. Every corner held a memory she somehow shared without explanation. When she finally left, she didn't hug me, didn't shake my hand, just stood up and smiled like she was happy with the night. She said she would come again soon. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, heart pounding. The apartment was quiet again, familiar again, but nothing felt right. Every piece of furniture, every framed photo, every mug on the counter seemed like it had been watched too closely. I sat on the couch for hours after, replaying the night in my head, trying to figure out how she could have known, trying to decide if I wanted to move or change the locks or report it. But mostly, I just sat and stared at the space around me, realizing that she had already been here in ways I couldn't understand, had memorized everything I thought was private, and could come back at any time. And that's what haunts me. That the apartment I've lived in for years, the one place I thought was mine alone, had been invaded without warning, and she claimed she liked the layout. I didn't realize something was off until I walked into the restaurant. Honestly, at first I thought I was just tired or overthinking. You know that feeling when your brain is moving faster than the world around you, and you're trying to catch up? That's how it started. I had matched with her on Tinder, a woman named Julia. Her profile was pretty normal. Pictures from the beach, a few from some music festivals, a selfie at a coffee shop. But her bio said she liked dark humor and small bars with a lot of character. I liked the sound of that, so I swiped right. We texted for a couple of days before deciding to meet. She suggested a local place she liked, an old bistro tucked down a narrow street in the older part of town. I agreed because it sounded chill, the kind of place where conversation could flow without shouting. When I got there, I noticed the first weird thing. A waiter was moving between tables near the entrance, and the second he saw me, he gave a kind of solemn nod and asked if I was doing okay since the incident. I froze for a moment. My brain blanked. I didn't know what he meant. What incident? The waiter didn't explain, just looked at me with sympathy before moving on to another table. I shook my head, trying to laugh it off, assuming maybe he was confusing me with someone else. I spotted Julia at a corner table, smiling and waving. Relief hit me. I could focus on something normal for a minute. I walked over and sat down, trying to act casual. The waiter came over to take our drink orders and gave me the same line, the same awkward sympathy. I opened my mouth to say something, maybe clarify, but Julia interrupted me in conversation, oblivious to the tension. I tried to let it go. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe someone had assumed I was someone else. The place was small, with exposed brick walls and dim hanging lights, giving it that cozy vibe. We started talking about movies and music, trying to ignore the weird energy that had settled around me. Then it happened again. The bartender, a young guy with tattoos up his arms, came over to refill Julia's water and glanced at me with the exact same look of pity, asking if I was doing okay since the incident. Now I was starting to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, panic. Not the screaming panic, but the kind that creeps in slowly, settling in your chest and refusing to let go. My mind raced. What incident? Was this some local gossip I didn't know about? Had something happened to me and I forgot? Julia didn't notice, talking about a concert she had been to the week before. She laughed at the right points, gestured naturally, completely unaware of what was happening around me. It was like she existed in a different world, a world where sympathy from strangers didn't signal anything abnormal. The night went on, and every staff member, without fail, gave me that same look. It wasn't subtle. There was a tightness in their smiles, a heaviness in the way they stood when they looked at me. Every greeting carried the weight of some story I wasn't part of, or maybe some story I had blocked out. I tried talking to Julia about it, carefully, indirectly. I asked if she had ever been here before, if she knew the staff. She said yes, she liked this place, came sometimes for the live jazz nights. That made sense, but it didn't explain the sympathy. It didn't explain the way the chef, who came to check on us when he brought our food, looked at me with his eyebrows raised in that same apologetic way, whispering that he hoped I was doing okay since the incident. I excused myself for a moment to go to the bathroom, hoping to figure out what was happening. I stopped outside the door, leaned against the wall, trying to remember anything recent that could be called an incident. Did I have a car accident? Did someone break into my apartment? Was it something work-related? Nothing came to mind. Nothing fit. When I came back, Julia asked what was wrong. I told her it was probably nothing. Maybe the staff knew each other. Maybe there was a local joke I didn't get. I smiled and tried to act normal. But every time someone passed our table, I could feel that look, the same sympathetic eyes scanning me and whispering that line in my head. The food arrived. Pasta with some sauce that smelled amazing, but I barely touched it. My brain was caught in loops, trying to make sense of why everyone knew about this mysterious incident. Every time I tried to shift attention to Julia, my mind raced back to the sympathetic faces, the quiet words, the way people leaned slightly toward me, just enough to suggest concern without asking questions. Hours passed. The restaurant started to empty. A couple of late-night customers trickled in, and even they gave me that same glance, subtle but unmistakable. It was like I had been marked by something in town, something I had no memory of, something that made strangers pity me without explanation. Julia seemed unfazed. She kept talking, telling stories about her weekend, her favorite jazz bands, and random memories from childhood. She laughed, pointed at decorations, commented on the exposed beams, the warm lighting. All the while, the staff kept casting these glances, the same line echoing in my head over and over. By the end of the night, I was exhausted in a way I hadn't been before. Not physically, but mentally. The world felt skewed, like everyone I passed on the street might recognize me and know about something I couldn't remember. Outside, the night air hit me, crisp and slightly damp from an earlier rain. Julia said she had a great time and smiled. I nodded, forcing a smile back. I drove home, checking my rearview mirror more times than necessary, half expecting someone to be following me, half expecting the whole city to know about this invisible incident that had somehow marked me. When I got inside my apartment, I sat on the couch for hours, replaying the night. Every waiter, every bartender, every glance, every whispered line. I couldn't find a single explanation. My mind wanted to think I had imagined it, but the consistency was too perfect, too precise, too intentional. I haven't gone back to that part of town. I haven't been on Tinder in months. Every time I think about that night, I remember the way those strangers looked at me, their eyes heavy with pity, their words quiet but echoing. And I wonder what I'm supposed to be remembering, what everyone else already knows, and why no one tells me the story of the incident. I honestly didn't think I'd end up feeling watched the entire night on a first date. You think first dates are supposed to be fun, casual, maybe awkward in small bursts, but nothing that makes you feel like you're under a microscope. That was my mistake, thinking this would be normal. I matched with her, Clara, on Tinder on a Thursday evening while I was scrolling through my phone on the couch. Her profile said she worked in psychology, had a weird obsession with true crime documentaries, and liked coffee shops with too many plants. Her photos looked like she actually existed outside of the apps, with messy hair, a backpack in one picture, another holding a ridiculously large latte. I swiped right. We started messaging, and it was easy at first. Fun banter, jokes about music, commentary about the city. She suggested meeting on Saturday night. Said she knew a small place downtown, a cafe that turned into a wine bar later, the kind of spot that felt intimate but not suffocating. I agreed. I thought I knew what kind of date this would be. I didn't. When I walked in, she was already there. She waved me over and smiled in a way that made me relax a little. Not too much, because she had this stare that felt like it was scanning every inch of me. Not in a flirty way, more like a detective who thinks you've committed a minor crime, but isn't saying what yet. We sat at a corner table with a few candles flickering. The place smelled like roasted coffee beans and wine. I tried to start with small talk, asking about her week, making jokes about city traffic. But she didn't just respond, she analyzed. She would point out, for example, how my tone changed when I laughed at a joke, what that might mean about my stress level or my past, the way I gestured with my hands, and how that suggested patterns in my personality. She was doing it out loud, to me, in real time, like she was recording observations for a client session. I laughed nervously at first, thinking maybe this was a quirky attempt at flirting. But then she kept going. She noticed how I avoided looking at the corner by the window, said it might be related to childhood experiences. She commented on my posture when I leaned back, speculated about my relationship with my parents, guessed my sleep schedule, my favorite type of movies, the way I organized my thoughts before speaking, all while maintaining this calm, clinical tone. It got worse the longer the night went on. She observed my eating habits, the way I held my glass, the patterns in my breathing. Every minor action I took was cataloged and interpreted. I tried redirecting the conversation to neutral topics, like music and weekend plans, but she folded every answer into a psychological observation. My favorite band. She deduced it revealed aspects of my personality I hadn't even admitted to myself. My favorite movie. She explained what that said about my subconscious fears. By the time the appetizer arrived, I had stopped trying to act natural. Every gesture, every glance, every word was being deconstructed. I noticed the waitress giving her a strange look, probably sensing the intensity, but she didn't seem to care. Clara was absorbed in her case study of me, and I was starting to feel less like a person and more like a subject. I tried to joke around about it, lightly, hoping she'd notice that I was uncomfortable. Instead, she laughed softly, wrote a few notes on her phone, and explained what my response to my joke might reveal about past social interactions. I wanted to ask her to stop, to just have a normal conversation, but something about her calm, confident way of speaking made it feel impossible to interrupt. I just let it happen. When the main course arrived, I barely touched it. I was too busy observing her observing me. She even noticed that. She mentioned it casually, like noting a symptom in a patient, suggesting my appetite patterns might be linked to stress from work or from the dynamics of the date. I could barely make eye contact without feeling exposed. I thought about leaving, but I didn't want to make a scene. I tried to focus on something else, the exposed brick wall behind the bar, the dim lights, the soft music. But every time I moved, she took notes, mentally or on her phone, and continued her analysis. It was relentless. Every joke I made, every facial expression, she had a psychological meaning attached to it. I noticed a pattern. She would pause, tilt her head slightly, then speak in this measured way, like she was thinking through a diagnosis out loud. She asked me questions too, but not normal date questions. They were probing, designed to reveal deeper things about me without asking directly. My reactions, the subtle shifts in my tone, the pace of my breathing, all of it became part of her ongoing evaluation. I wanted to text my friend to tell them about this, to check if I was overreacting, but I couldn't. Something in the way she carried herself, her confidence and calmness, made it feel wrong to pull out my phone in the middle of her analysis. I felt trapped, like the night had turned into a psychology exam I hadn't signed up for. By dessert, I had stopped speaking much. I barely touched the chocolate tart, just stared at it, trying to imagine a world where this date wasn't a clinical breakdown of every little quirk I had. She noticed, of course, and interpreted it. My silence, she said, indicated a tendency to internalize conflict, a reflective streak, and possibly a resistance to confrontation. She smiled kindly, as if offering me a diagnosis I couldn't argue with. The lights dimmed further. The place emptied, except for a few regulars at the bar. Every movement I made, every blink, every subtle gesture was cataloged and analyzed. It didn't feel like a date anymore. It felt like she had taken a spotlight and trained it on me, showing every imperfection and predicting every reaction. I was performing without knowing the rules. I couldn't eat. I couldn't joke. I couldn't even laugh naturally. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't felt since childhood, the kind of vulnerability that makes your stomach twist and your chest tighten. And she didn't see it as uncomfortable. She saw it as data. She even mentioned that the way my hands trembled slightly when I held the fork could indicate mild anxiety triggered by unpredictable social situations. By the end of the night, I felt exhausted in a way I hadn't in years. My mind was buzzing with everything she had said, every observation, every interpretation. I wasn't just tired. I felt like I had been emptied, every thought and behavior noted and catalogued. We walked outside. I couldn't say I had fun, not really. She was cheerful, casual, smiling, talking about her next date or the book she was reading. I nodded, muttered polite words, and felt my heart pounding, relieved that the night was over but also uneasy, like I had just survived something I couldn't fully describe. I went home, sat on my couch, and replayed everything. Every tilt of her head, every note she had made, every comment about my posture, my breathing, my gestures, my reactions. I thought about how I hadn't felt like myself at all, how I had been a subject rather than a person, and how that awareness was haunting me even after the night ended. The next day, I deleted my Tinder account. I didn't block her. I didn't report her. I just erased the app and didn't look back. But even now, weeks later, I think about that night. I think about every word she said, every casual analysis she made, every time she smiled while dissecting me. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't mean, it wasn't even obvious at first, but it was invasive, the kind of invasion that leaves a lasting mark. And that's what sticks with me. Not that the date ended badly, not that she was rude or cruel, but that someone could watch every tiny move I made, interpret it, catalog it, and make me feel like I was the case study, not a person. It's the kind of thing that makes you think twice before meeting anyone from an app again, the kind of thing that makes your own mind feel unsafe in your own body. I matched with him on Tinder, and right away, something about him felt off but also magnetic. His profile was clean, simple, nothing weird, just selfies in different city spots and a few short lines about hobbies. I swiped right on a whim, not expecting anything. The next thing I knew, we were texting nonstop, and he suggested meeting at this small diner in the outskirts of the city. It wasn't flashy or popular, just neon lights flickering outside, a few booths inside, and the smell of greasy breakfast that somehow made it feel cozy. I got there first, of course, nervously twisting my bag strap while scanning the room. He walked in 15 minutes later, tall, calm, like he had been expecting me. We sat down in a booth near the window. Conversation started normal, usual small talk about work, hobbies, movies, all the normal first date stuff. He seemed polite, charming even, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something behind his eyes, something calculated. About an hour into the date, he leaned back and casually dropped a sentence that made my stomach flip. He told me he only dated women with my exact name. At first, I thought I misheard, maybe a joke, maybe some weird pickup line, but he was dead serious. He said I was the 7th one this year. My heart skipped. 7th? That's an insane number of coincidences for one person, right? He didn't seem embarrassed, didn't stutter, just said it calmly, like it was normal. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. I told myself maybe he was just weirdly specific about names, like some harmless quirk. But the more he talked about it, the more detailed he got. He said he had a pattern, reasons he liked women with that name, and how he noticed similarities between each of them. Each detail he shared about the previous 6 was strangely precise, the things that made them tick, the way they moved, their routines, even small habits. My stomach started twisting, a cold knot forming as I realized he had been tracking, studying, memorizing every detail of these women before me. We left the diner and walked to a nearby park, the streets empty and wet from earlier rain. Streetlights reflected off puddles, making the world look distorted and half real. He kept talking about the previous 6, how he found them, how he approached them, and how things ended. I tried to laugh, act normal, keep pace, but each story was detailed, unsettling, precise. He mentioned places he had taken them, restaurants, walks by the river, even the order of meals they liked. I started noticing patterns in the city I had never paid attention to, and a feeling of dread settled over me. He asked questions about my routine casually, almost like he was building a mental map. What streets I take home, where I usually eat, what time I leave for work, even what kinds of locks I had on my doors. At first, it seemed like curiosity, but the way he phrased it made me tense. Every time I tried to divert the conversation, he circled back, asking more subtly, inserting questions as if testing me. I realized he wasn't just interested in me, he was cataloging everything, just like he had done with the previous 6. We ended up walking along a little trail that led through some overgrown fields, a quiet spot I thought was safe. He asked again about routines, how predictable people are, if it would be easy to anticipate someone's movements. My heart was racing, my palms sweating, but I tried to act casual, like I wasn't piecing it together. But the truth was obvious. He wasn't looking for love. He was looking for a pattern, for repetition, for control. The calm, polite exterior was just that, exterior. When we got to the river, he stopped and looked at me, saying he liked to observe, compare, notice similarities. He had a notebook in his bag, casually hidden, and I caught a glimpse of it sticking out. I felt my stomach drop. I didn't know what was inside, but I knew it held the details of the previous 6, maybe even mine already starting to be logged. The thought made my legs weak, the kind of helpless feeling you get when you realize you're part of a game you didn't sign up for. Over the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to convince myself he was harmless, just a very weird person with an obsession, but every time I walked past the diner, the park, the river trail, I saw his perspective, imagined him cataloging details of strangers, looking for the next match in a chain of women with my name. The patterns, the obsession, the calm, methodical way he described everything, it was suffocating. He kept texting after the date, casual, friendly, asking if I wanted to meet again. But every message carried an undercurrent of calculation, a subtle reminder that he had rules, and I was part of them. I couldn't ignore it, and I couldn't respond normally without feeling like I was stepping into a trap. Every time my phone buzzed, I imagined him tracking my reactions, noting details, comparing me to the previous 6. I started noticing familiar patterns in the city. Streetlights he might have walked under with the other women, cafes he had logged, benches in parks he had cataloged. I felt like I was part of a long experiment, a sequence of repetitions I didn't know how to escape. Even when I avoided the streets he mentioned, I felt him there, observing, making comparisons, evaluating. One night, I drove past the diner just to see if it was empty. It was closed, silent, neon off. But in my rearview mirror, I imagined him watching, sitting in shadows, comparing details, waiting for patterns to emerge. The thought made me tense, paranoid. I couldn't shake it. Every city block felt like part of his network, every familiar path part of his system. And I realized he didn't need to be physically present to make me feel cataloged. The obsession extended beyond proximity. I avoided Tinder after that, deleted the app, deleted my profile, tried to erase any trace of myself that might draw him back. But every time I passed a park bench, a coffee shop, a river trail, I imagined him there, comparing, remembering, repeating his patterns. The previous 6 women weren't names anymore. They were steps, milestones, templates. And I was the 7th, already folded into the sequence. I tried talking to friends about it, but nobody understood. They laughed it off, called me paranoid, said it was a weird coincidence. I couldn't explain the obsessive level of detail, the calm way he described it all, the way he made me feel like a subject in an experiment. I felt like I was being measured constantly, a character in a game I didn't want to play. I stopped walking at night alone, avoided empty streets, even changed my routine at work. Every place I had been with him, every detail he had learned, haunted me. My lid felt different, like it wasn't just my space anymore, like he had mapped it too. I couldn't feel safe anywhere, and I couldn't stop thinking about the other 6. Who were they now? Did they realize the pattern? Were they trying to escape too? The thought that he had done this 6 times before me with the same rules made every encounter I had had with him more disturbing. Even months later, I saw him on Tinder again, a new profile, clean and polished, just like the first. The realization hit me cold. He was probably looking for the next one, the 8th, following the same obsession, repeating the same pattern. I deleted my profile immediately, felt my pulse spike, and drove around the city in circles trying to shake the thought from my mind. But it stuck. The name obsession wasn't harmless. It wasn't just a quirk or a preference. It was methodical, structured, consuming. 7 women, 7 iterations, and the 7th was me. The calm, polite exterior, the stories about the previous 6, the notebook, the attention to detail. It wasn't just about dating. It was about patterns, control, repetition. And knowing I fit into that sequence made me tense, paranoid, and exhausted all at once. I still walk differently, avoid quiet streets, hesitate at intersections, glance over my shoulder. I don't swipe right anymore. I don't trust coincidences. The memory of him, his calm obsession, and the 7 women with my name is always there, lingering like a shadow I can't outrun. Every new encounter with someone who shares my name makes my stomach twist, makes me wonder if he's already started the next iteration. I can't stop thinking about it, and I can't stop looking for patterns, because once you've been cataloged, the world never feels like it's entirely yours again. I met her on Tinder, and right away she stood out. Her profile wasn't overdone, just a few selfies with a sharp smile and a picture of her sitting on a park bench with a notebook. Nothing flashy, but there was something about her eyes, like she was always thinking a few steps ahead. I swiped right, matched, and after some casual messaging, she suggested we meet at this coffee shop tucked into the corner of downtown. It wasn't a chain, more like a place where artists probably hung out, with dim lighting, eclectic chairs, and the smell of burnt espresso. I thought it sounded perfect. I got there first, of course, because I was nervous, and I always show up early. She arrived a few minutes later, walked in like she owned the place, scanning the room before spotting me. She smiled and waved, carrying a backpack that looked way too big for just books. She sat down across from me, and at first, the conversation was normal. Music, shows, where we worked, the usual get-to-know-you stuff. But then, she said she was writing a novel, and I noticed her notebook sticking out of her bag, pages already filled with handwriting. She didn't just mention writing casually, she leaned in and started asking me questions, the kind of questions that made my stomach tighten. She wanted to know in detail how someone might get away with murder. At first, I laughed, thinking it was some weird joke. I mean, how do you even answer that without sounding ridiculous? But she wasn't laughing. She was serious, writing everything down, asking about timing, alibis, evidence, cleanup, escape routes. I thought maybe she was writing some kind of thriller, a suspense story, but the way she asked it felt personal, like she was trying to see if I would slip up and give real advice. I tried to redirect the conversation, talking about settings for a story or motivations for characters, but she kept circling back, probing for more details. How would someone dispose of evidence without being caught? What kind of object would leave the least trace? How could a person make sure no one saw them coming or going? My mind was racing. I kept telling myself this was just a novel, a weird obsession with crime fiction, but something about the intensity in her eyes, the way she scribbled furiously, made me start second-guessing. We left the coffee shop after a few hours, walking toward a nearby park. The streets were wet from earlier rain, reflecting the streetlights in strange, long streaks. She kept asking questions, not just general stuff now, but hypothetical situations with a level of detail that made my stomach twist. She asked about times when the neighborhood was empty, what kind of tools could be used, what noises were noticeable. I laughed nervously at first, but the questions kept getting more specific, like she wanted me to think through every angle. I realized halfway through the walk that her questions weren't hypothetical anymore. She was imagining scenarios in my own neighborhood, with details about streets I'd driven down 100 times, specific times of day, and spots where I knew no one would be around. It wasn't about writing anymore. It was reconnaissance in the way she phrased it, casually slipping in questions as if she was testing the reality of it. We stopped by a little live tucked behind the park. She said she wanted to show me something in her notebook, and I followed, thinking it was normal, but my gut was twisting. Inside, she opened the notebook to a page full of diagrams and notes that mirrored our surroundings. The streets we had walked, the alleyways, the small parking lots, even the park benches. I flipped through the pages slowly, realizing she had been mapping the city in a way that was obsessive, precise, and too real. She asked me again how someone might disappear without leaving a trace, and the casual way she asked made me freeze. I tried to answer vaguely, talking about how police reports might work or how evidence could be contaminated in fiction. She kept pressing, leaning closer, insisting I be detailed. My palms were sweating. I told myself she was just passionate about her story, but the air around her felt heavy, like she wasn't just asking questions. She was testing limits, seeing what I might admit, what I might suggest, what I might do. We walked back to the main streets after a while, but I couldn't shake the notebook from my mind. Every page I had glimpsed felt like a blueprint. The streets, the landmarks, the timings, the way she asked questions, it all made my brain scramble. She wasn't just curious about crime. She was curious about execution, the step-by-step logistics, and how an ordinary person could get away with something unthinkable. The intensity made me tense, made me wish I had never met her. Over the next week, we texted sporadically. She would ask follow-up questions about details I had mentioned or ideas for her novel. Each message had a tone that made my skin crawl, like she was cataloging, remembering, evaluating. I started noticing things in the neighborhood. People standing too long in doorways, cars parked where they shouldn't be, shadows that moved a little too deliberately. I couldn't tell if I was paranoid or if my brain was just keyed into her obsession. One night, she suggested we meet at a small park near the river. I felt reluctant, but I didn't want to be rude. When I got there, she had brought the notebook again, pages sticking out, and she asked me to walk with her along the river path, asking questions as we went. She asked about access points, where someone could hide, how long it would take to cross certain areas unnoticed. I told myself she was still writing a novel, but my stomach was heavy, tense, watching her lean over the notebook, while glancing around like she was checking the environment herself. The air was damp, and fog was starting to roll in from the river. It made everything look muted, soft, but also made shadows seem deeper. She asked about timing, the perfect time to do something without witnesses, how long someone could remain undetected. My heart started racing. I realized I didn't want to be here anymore, didn't want to keep giving her ideas, even if they were theoretical. But she had this calm, insistent way about her, like she believed the answers would only make her story better. We left the park and walked back toward the streets. Every alley we passed, every empty sidewalk, she asked questions, gently, almost casually, but the questions were getting more and more vivid. She asked if I thought people noticed details like the way locks clicked, the sound of doors opening, the patterns of streetlights. I felt cornered, like I had stepped into a scenario I couldn't escape, and the more I tried to brush it off, the more she pressed. By the time we reached her car, I realized something. The notebook wasn't about writing a novel. It was about learning, cataloging, planning. Every casual question, every hypothetical scenario, every street detail was being stored, internalized. I tried to leave casually, saying I had to go, but she smiled, that same sharp smile, and asked one last question about a corner near my live. I froze, felt my stomach drop, and realized she was memorizing everything. She didn't need to write it down anymore. It was already stored in her mind, every detail I had innocently offered. I walked to my car, heart pounding, trying to convince myself she was just a weird, over-obsessed writer. But the thought of her memorizing the streets I knew, the timings, the gaps in the neighborhood, kept me tense for days. I started noticing things in my own live, doors that clicked differently, noises that made me stop mid-step, shadows that didn't make sense. Every time she texted, it was about the next detail she wanted to explore, the next corner, the next alley, the next hypothetical scenario. I felt trapped in a web of questions that felt like they had real stakes. I stopped meeting her. I stopped replying to messages. But sometimes, weeks later, I would see a familiar figure across the street, or notice someone walking slowly behind me on empty sidewalks, or even see a reflection in a window that felt too deliberate. The notebook, the questions, the obsessive way she had focused on details, it didn't stay in the coffee shop, didn't stay with her. It followed me, planted seeds of unease everywhere I went, made me check locks, doors, windows, shadows. Eventually, I deleted Tinder. I moved my schedule around, avoided places I knew she liked, took long detours to avoid empty streets she might walk on. And still, I couldn't escape that voice in my head, asking questions in her tone, forcing me to imagine every scenario she had cataloged, forcing me to see myself as part of the story she was writing. The notebook was never just paper. It was a blueprint, a study, a quiet invasion that followed me even when I was alone. I don't know if she ever did anything. I don't know if she was planning, or just obsessed with realism. But the memory of those questions, her intensity, and the notebook full of mapped streets and observations still make my stomach tighten every time I walk somewhere alone at night. So, it started on a Tuesday. I was scrolling through Tinder like usual, half paying attention to swiping left and right, when I matched with this girl who seemed normal enough. Her profile wasn't anything flashy, just a few selfies with her dog and a weird filter she probably thought was funny. We started talking, nothing intense, just some back and forth about music and random stuff. I wasn't expecting much from it. Just casual chatting while I procrastinated homework. That's when my phone buzzed. Not a Tinder notification, not a text from a friend, just a regular text message. The message was from a number I didn't recognize. The contact was saved as future me. I didn't remember saving anything like that, so I opened it, half expecting some spam link or some dumb joke. The text said something simple. Don't go to the park tonight. That's it. No context, no signature, nothing. I stared at it, laughed a little, thinking maybe it was some weird Tinder joke or someone trying to prank me. I didn't reply, didn't save the number, just ignored it, and went back to chatting with a girl. A couple hours later, another text came. Same number, same contact name. This one said, "You will regret it if you leave your live." Now my stomach dropped. It was vague but specific at the same time. I wasn't even planning on leaving my live, but the wording made it sound urgent. I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, thinking maybe I was just tired, maybe my brain was making it up. But I couldn't shake the weird edge to it. I tried to continue my night normally. I hung out with a girl a little over text, got distracted by memes and stupid videos, but the texts kept coming every few hours. You need to check the window. Don't fall asleep before midnight. Stop what you're doing. Each one felt more urgent, more specific, more like someone had been inside my head or had been watching me. I tried calling the number once, just to mess with whoever was doing it, but it went straight to voicemail. No one left a message. By the third day, it got worse. The messages started describing things that were happening in real time. Your neighbor is standing outside. The heater just clicked off. Someone is outside your live. My hands were shaking as I read them. I didn't even want to get up, but I had to check the windows. Nothing. Just my neighbor pulling their trash can down the street and the usual creaks of an old live settling. I thought maybe someone had access to my social media. Maybe they were tracking my location. I checked all my accounts, changed passwords, even considered getting a new number, but the messages kept coming. It was hard to sleep. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would jump, and I would stare at the screen, half expecting it to say something impossible. One night, it said, "You will hear the footsteps in 10 minutes. I didn't move. I waited. And 10 minutes later, I swear I could hear soft steps on the hardwood floors outside my room. I checked everything. No one there, nothing out of place. My hands were numb, my eyes wide open, staring at the door, trying to convince myself it was just the live creaking. But the timing was too exact, too precise. I tried to tell friends, but they thought I was joking or just stressed out from school. Nobody believed me. I even considered calling the cops, but what would I even say? Someone is texting me from a number called Future Me and telling me stuff that hasn't happened yet. They'd probably think I was losing it. I started keeping a notebook of all the messages, the exact time they came, what they said, everything. I didn't want to ignore them, didn't want to mess up whatever strange pattern was happening. The texts didn't just warn me anymore, they started instructing me. Go outside. Don't look back. Take the keys. At first, I didn't follow them. I wanted to. I wanted to prove that it was all fake, but something in the way they were written made me hesitate. One of the messages said, "They are watching, and you will know at the 3rd streetlight." That night, I walked to the 3rd streetlight in my neighborhood, just to see if anything would happen. Nothing. Just an empty street, quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. But when I turned back toward my live, I swore I saw a figure in the shadows, motionless, watching. I ran inside and locked the door. My phone buzzed immediately after. Good. You saw them. After that, the texts got more personal, more invasive. They knew what I was eating, what I was wearing, what I had done that day. It wasn't just predictive anymore, it was active observation. The line between coincidence and deliberate knowledge was gone. I started getting texts, even when my phone was off, or at least that's what it felt like. I would wake up, see the screen lit up with messages that had come in the middle of the night, warning me about things that had already happened, or things I was about to do. It started affecting how I lived. I stopped going outside. I didn't hang out with a girl from Tinder anymore. I avoided calling friends. I didn't want to move, didn't want to do anything that might trigger the texts in some new way. One morning it said, "Don't eat breakfast." I ignored it, thinking it was ridiculous, but the second I grabbed my cereal, my phone buzzed. Bad choice. I dropped the spoon, my heart hammering, staring at the ceiling as if the words themselves were moving. I couldn't delete the number. I tried blocking it, tried changing my SIM, tried everything, but it found its way back. Every new number I got, every app I installed, it still sent messages. It had become constant, unavoidable. It wasn't just a nuisance anymore, it was a presence. It dictated my movements, my decisions, my sleep schedule. I lived in a weird half-awareness, always expecting the next text, always checking for the next instruction. The girl from Tinder texted me a few weeks later, asking why I disappeared. I couldn't tell her the truth, couldn't explain that a number called Future Me was controlling my life, knowing things it shouldn't, predicting things that weren't supposed to happen yet. I told her I was busy, that I had stuff going on, and she accepted it, probably thinking I was flaking. I started avoiding Tinder entirely, deleted the app, even stopped using social media for the most part. One night, it said, "Go to the edge of the park." I didn't want to, but I felt like I had to follow it. I drove there, parked near the tree line, and waited. My phone buzzed again. Look behind the oak. I did. Nothing. just the bark and leaves in the moonlight. I laughed nervously at myself, thinking maybe I was imagining things. Then another buzz. Don't move. That's when I saw a shadow detach itself from the tree, slow, deliberate, moving toward the edge of the parking lot. My hands went cold. I sat frozen, staring at it, phone vibrating in my lap, heart thudding in my ears. It stopped far enough away that I couldn't tell what it was, just a figure, tall, dark, unmoving. My phone buzzed again. You made it. Now wait. I didn't wait. I drove off, fast, glancing in the rearview mirror. The figure didn't move, didn't chase me. Just stood there. The texts continued. Don't stop. Don't sleep. Don't turn around. I realized I wasn't living anymore, just reacting. I was a passenger in my own life, following instructions from something that claimed to be my future self. I tried to fight it, ignore it, block it, change everything, but nothing worked. It knew where I was, what I did, what I would do next. The messages weren't just predictions, they were commands. And the worst part was that I couldn't figure out if following them actually kept me safe, or if ignoring them would have been better. I had no reference point. No explanation. No end. Just the constant buzz of the phone, the impossibility of escape. Eventually, I stopped trying to fight it. I started following instructions, keeping track of everything, living minute to minute based on the texts. I went to random places at odd times, walked weird routes, did whatever it said. Sometimes it warned me about dangers that weren't there. Sometimes it predicted things that I couldn't believe were real until they happened. It was relentless, exhausting, and terrifying, but I had no choice. Months passed. I lost track of friends, schoolwork, even the girl from Tinder. My world had narrowed down to the number saved as future me and the instructions it sent. I didn't know if it was really me, some prank, or something else entirely. I didn't want to know. I just did what it said, kept track, stayed alive, stayed cautious, stayed awake. My life had become a series of alerts, notifications, warnings, and commands. There was no normal anymore, just the texts and me, waiting for the next one, hoping it didn't end badly. I still get texts. Every day, all day. Every time I think I've caught up, a new one appears. It doesn't matter where I am, what I'm doing, or how far I try to run from it. The number still shows up as future me, and I still obey. Because the last message I ever got before I stopped trying to question it said, "You will die if you don't listen," and I don't want to find out if that's true. Okay, so I swiped right on this girl on Tinder because her pictures made her look fun, like the kind of person who could make a boring Friday night feel like an adventure. I wasn't expecting anything crazy, just some casual hangout, maybe grab some tacos and walk around downtown. We matched, started chatting, and after a few back and forths, she suggested we meet at this park that was kind of on the edge of the city. She said it was quiet, not crowded, perfect to walk and talk. I thought it sounded chill, honestly. I got there first, and I was pacing a little because I always get nervous meeting someone new. The sun was just dipping behind the trees, painting the sky in these weird orange and purple streaks. It was the kind of evening that makes everything feel cinematic. I saw her car parked near the edge of the parking lot. It was this old hatchback, dusty, kind of beat up, but not in a gross way. She waved from inside, smiling, and I waved back, trying to look casual. We started walking around the little trail that cut through the edge of the park. It wasn't a long trail, maybe a mile loop, but it twisted in these little nooks, shaded by thick trees and overgrown bushes. It smelled like wet leaves and damp dirt, and the air was just that perfect coolness right before night fully hits. We were talking about dumb stuff at first, like favorite shows and whether pineapple belongs on pizza, just normal awkward meet-cute talk. She laughed at some of my jokes, which made me feel like I was doing okay. Then we passed her car again on the way back toward the parking lot. I don't know what happened exactly. but the hatchback popped open like someone had pressed a button, and the back just flung up. I froze for a second, thinking maybe she forgot to shut it, or maybe the latch was broken. But then I noticed what was in the trunk. It wasn't groceries, it wasn't gym bags, it wasn't blankets. It was a full-on camping setup. Tent, sleeping bags, portable stove, lanterns. At first, it didn't look too weird, except for the shovel leaning against the side of the trunk like it belonged there. She leaned back slightly, like she noticed I was staring. I tried to play it cool, but my stomach started doing that weird twisty thing it does when something feels off. I told myself she probably goes camping a lot. Maybe she drives around for weekends, and the shovel is just for digging fire pits. But something about the way it was just stacked so neatly, almost intentionally, made me pause. I wasn't sure why it gave me this gut punch of unease. We kept walking, but I couldn't stop glancing at the trunk every few steps. The sun had almost set, and shadows were starting to stretch across the trail, making everything feel sharper, like the world was splitting into lines and corners. I started noticing little things, the way she didn't have a phone out, how quiet she was compared to before, and that she kept looking behind her, not at me, just behind her. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that maybe she was shy or just distracted, but my instincts were screaming something different. We made a circle back to the car, and the trunk had closed itself somehow. I don't know if the wind caught it or if it was some kind of old latch that flips shut automatically, but it clicked closed in a way that made the sound echo weirdly in the empty parking lot. I started thinking about how she must have parked far away on purpose. Maybe for privacy or whatever, but now I was noticing how isolated everything felt. The park was almost empty. The trail we had walked through was empty. The few cars left in the lot were spaced out like islands, and that feeling of quiet was suddenly heavy, not peaceful. She suggested we sit on the hood of her car for a bit, which seemed normal, but the closer we got, the more I noticed details I hadn't before. There were little scratches along the side of the hatchback, like it had been dragged along some brush or a gravel edge, and the tires had dirt that looked like it hadn't been washed off in weeks. The shovel was gone now, like she had moved it back inside, but I swear I had seen it, and I couldn't shake the image of it leaning there against the open trunk. We sat there, and we started talking about music and whatnot, but my brain was stuck on the trunk. I kept imagining what it would be like if she actually had something buried out there, the way people in movies hide things in the woods. I told myself to stop, that it was ridiculous, but every time she reached into the car to grab a water bottle or adjust something, my eyes flicked to that space where the shovel had been. I tried to act normal, laughing at her jokes, nodding, even showing her a funny meme on my phone, but my pulse was weirdly fast and my palms felt sticky. At some point, she suggested walking back to the trail again, and I hesitated. My gut told me to just call it a night, but I didn't want to be rude, didn't want to look paranoid. We started walking, and I kept my distance a step behind her, looking at the path, the overhanging branches, and imagining all the ways the darkness could hide things. I thought about how easy it would be to disappear if someone really wanted to, how the shovel could dig more than just fire pits, how the neatly packed camping gear could mean she planned long stays, hidden, away from anyone noticing. I felt my chest tighten, and I realized I couldn't even remember the last time I had felt this kind of nervous just walking behind someone I met online. The trail looped around a small grove, and there was a little creek cutting across it. The water made soft gurgling noises, and the dusk shadows made shapes on the trees that weren't there in daylight. She stopped for a second, bending over to tie her shoe or adjust something. And that's when I noticed the dirt was disturbed near the tree roots, as if something had been dug recently. My mind immediately went to the trunk, to the shovel, to every horror movie scenario I'd ever half laughed at. I froze, my stomach flipping. I wanted to run, but I didn't want to make her think I was losing it. We walked past it, and the sun had dipped fully below the horizon now. Everything was darker than I expected, and the parking lot lights hadn't turned on yet. Her car was there when we got back, normal looking, nothing out of place, but I couldn't shake the image of that trunk popping open and the shovel leaning there like some kind of warning sign I didn't understand. She waved, smiled, and got in, and I followed, trying to act casual while my head was spinning with thoughts I couldn't untangle. She drove off down the empty street, and I realized I had no idea where she lived or where she was going. The roads we took were unfamiliar, twisting into neighborhoods with empty streets and rows of identical houses. My stomach was still knotted. I kept thinking about how easy it would be to end up somewhere isolated with someone you just met online, how everything could flip in a second. She parked in front of a small live tucked behind a fence, not flashy or scary, just ordinary. But the ordinary feeling did nothing to calm me. I couldn't stop thinking about the trunk, the shovel, the camping gear. I told myself to breathe, to relax, to just treat it like a normal hangout, but I couldn't. I kept imagining the trunk opening in the dark, the shovel glinting under a streetlight, and the way everything had seemed too quiet, too controlled, too staged for an innocent meetup. I thanked her, walked to my car parked down the street, and the whole way there I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the hatchback pop open again or shadows moving where they shouldn't. I got in my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time, just breathing and trying to shake off the feeling. My mind kept going back to the trunk, the camping gear, the shovel. What kind of person packs all that in their car and drives around at dusk, waiting for someone to meet them? I don't know. Maybe she was normal. Maybe I overreacted. But I can't stop thinking about how easy it would have been for things to go wrong, how the neat arrangement of her trunk and that shovel just didn't feel right. I drove home slowly, taking side streets, not because I thought she would follow, just because I didn't trust the world anymore for a little while. I kept imagining the trunk popping open in the dark, the way shadows stretched over the dirt, the way someone could vanish before you even realized it. I parked outside my live, shut the engine off, and sat there for a minute, still sweating, still heart-pounding. I knew it probably wasn't a horror movie situation, but my brain couldn't stop playing the what-if scenarios, each one worse than the last. I went inside, closed the door, locked it, and for the rest of the night, I kept thinking about that trunk, about the shovel, about how easy it is to be caught off guard when you think everything is normal. Even now, I can't look at camping gear the same way, can't see a shovel without remembering that trunk swinging open just as the last light of day vanished. I remember swiping right on his profile because it seemed normal enough at first glance. His pictures were all outdoorsy, nothing flashy, just him hiking, sitting at a coffee shop, a selfie with a dog. The bio was simple, funny little quips about movies and music, but then came a line that stuck with me. He said he didn't use social media because people shouldn't leave evidence. At first, I thought it was just quirky, kind of mysterious, maybe even a little endearing. Most people are glued to their phones, someone who's not felt like a rare thing. I didn't think too much of it when he suggested we meet for dinner at this little diner on the edge of town, the kind with neon lights buzzing faintly and vinyl booths that squeak if you sit wrong. When I got there, he was already sitting at the booth near the window, fidgeting slightly, like he didn't want to be noticed too much. I waved, and he smiled, stood up, shook my hand, and I noticed right away that he didn't have a bag, no phone, nothing in sight. I tried to strike up small talk while we waited for our food, but he kept glancing around, constantly scanning the diner, like he was watching more than just the street outside. The first half hour was fairly normal. We ordered burgers and fries, the kind that come in paper-lined baskets, the kind you don't have to think about. He was quiet mostly, but his comments were sharp, almost clinical in how precise they were. I asked a few questions, tried to keep it light, and he answered without hesitation, but always with this strange edge, like he was choosing his words very deliberately. The more he spoke, the more I realized I didn't know anything about him except what he was willing to tell me. Then he brought it up again, his lack of social media. He said people leave evidence everywhere online, and he preferred not to. No accounts, no profiles, no check-ins, no photos tagged. No digital trail. At the time, it sounded paranoid, but quirky, like some odd hobbyist who took privacy too seriously. I didn't question it much. I thought maybe he was just being cautious. But something about how he said it made me tense. It wasn't just caution. It was like he had rehearsed the idea of leaving no trail for years and treated it like a rule he would die by. We finished our meals, and he suggested a walk down the side street behind the diner, away from the main road. The street was narrow, barely lit, with chain-link fences and a few shuttered shops. I was hesitant, but he walked confidently, hands in his pockets, motioning for me to follow. That's when the oddness started to feel heavier. As we walked, he began asking very specific questions about my daily routines. Not casual stuff. He wanted to know my favorite cafes, which days I went grocery shopping, the route I took to work, even what time I left in the morning. At first, I tried to answer casually, laughing it off, thinking it was just getting to know each other. But then the questions got sharper, more detailed. He asked what medications I took, what my doctor's office looked like, what kind of locks were on my apartment door. I froze. That wasn't normal Tinder conversation. I tried steering the conversation back to safer topics, asking about his job, his hobbies, anything, but he always came back to these questions, and always with that same unnerving calmness. He didn't push aggressively, he just asked, letting silence hang if I didn't answer right away, like he was measuring my hesitation. The night dragged on as we wandered past empty parking lots and alleys. At some point, I realized we were far from the diner, past streets I didn't recognize, and he still had no phone, no wallet visible, no way to call anyone or get help. I started feeling trapped. My instincts screamed at me that something wasn't right, but I kept thinking maybe I was overreacting. Then we passed a small park, one of those tiny city parks with a single bench and a flickering lamp. He stopped there, looked at me, and said something that made my stomach twist. He asked if I knew anyone else who might be following me or paying attention to my routines. It wasn't phrased like a joke, and it wasn't casual curiosity. It was calculated, like he wanted to map out every part of my life with the precision of a blueprint. I started walking faster, trying to keep my tone light, trying to act like I was just joking about being tired and wanting to head home. But he matched my pace effortlessly, silently, until the park's shadows swallowed us both. I noticed then that he didn't carry a flashlight. Nothing, just eyes scanning the darkness like he was reading the air around us. At that point, panic started creeping in. I realized how little I knew about him. No phone, no social media, no past connections I could verify. His insistence on leaving no evidence suddenly felt like a warning, like a principle that applied to more than just online accounts. It felt like he wanted the entire encounter erased, invisible, untraceable. My pulse spiked, and I tried to think of excuses, ways to get away without seeming rude or alarming. Finally, I suggested heading back toward the diner, pretending I needed to check on my car. He agreed immediately, still calm, but that edge was there, a silent tension vibrating in his movements. The walk back was quiet, every street lamp casting long, uneven shadows. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder. Back at the diner, I noticed the lights inside were dimmer, fewer customers, and every now and then a glance from one of the staff felt heavier than normal, almost knowing. I shook it off, focused on pretending everything was casual, everything was normal. When we said our goodbyes outside, he smiled, thanked me for the evening, and slipped away into the night without ever giving me a phone number or even hinting at a follow-up. I walked home slowly, constantly checking behind me. My mind wouldn't stop racing. The things he said, the way he moved, the way he carried himself, it all made sense in a horrifying way. He left no traces, kept no records, and he wanted me to be part of an evening that would vanish as if it had never existed. Every detail of the night replayed in my head. The diner, the The shadows, the streets, the questions about routines, the absence of any digital trace. I realized I could tell no one where I'd been. No one could verify anything, and that fact alone sent a chill down my spine. The next day, I tried texting him, just a casual message, and I realized I didn't have a number. He never gave me one. No social media, no email, nothing. He had orchestrated the night to be ephemeral, leaving me with memories and an unsettling impression, but no evidence, no way to connect, nothing concrete. I tried retracing the route in my mind, trying to remember every landmark, every turn, hoping to make sense of it, but the streets were all anonymous, all nondescript, like a city designed for erasure. I haven't heard from him since, and I haven't tried matching with anyone else on that app for a while. Sometimes, when I'm out in public, I catch someone moving a little too deliberately, scanning the crowd in a way that makes my chest tighten, makes me think of him disappearing into the night with no trace. The thought lingers that someone could be watching, measuring, cataloging routines, leaving no evidence, and I realize how unnervingly easy it is for a person to vanish from the world entirely while still making a mark on someone else's life. The strangest part is that I can remember the night in full, every detail, and yet it's like a ghost. It exists only in my memory. I have photos from the diner, but none include him. None capture the weight of the questions, the scanning eyes, the deliberate absence of digital proof. It's terrifying to know someone can exist like that, fully present and yet untraceable, and that my entire interaction with him can vanish as easily as smoke. I've told a few friends bits and pieces, leaving out the street wandering, leaving out the questions, because it sounds insane. They nod politely, laugh at my hesitation, and move on. They can't understand what it feels like to have someone disappear so completely, to leave you with only the echo of a presence that was perfectly orchestrated to vanish. I keep thinking about him when I check my phone, when I think about dating again, when I consider sharing my routines even casually. The lesson isn't about privacy or social media. It's about how someone can manipulate the idea of invisibility, and you can't fight something you can't trace. I should have known from the start that this was going to be a weird night, but I didn't. I met Lily on Tinder. Her profile said she liked hiking, horror movies, and had a weird obsession with board games. I thought she seemed fun, someone I could actually spend time with without overthinking it. We messaged for a couple of weeks, easy back and forth, nothing too heavy, and then she asked if I wanted to grab dinner at this little Italian place near the riverfront. I said sure. When I got there, she was waiting, and I immediately noticed something off. She wasn't alone. Sitting beside her was a woman I assumed was her mom, early 50s, perfectly still in her chair, dressed neatly in a dark blouse and jeans, hair pulled back in a tight bun. Lily introduced her casually, like it was no big deal that her mom was joining a first date. I nodded, smiled, shook her hand, tried to make it normal. She barely moved, just held my gaze for a second, then sat back in her chair and stared. That stare didn't waver for the entire night. At first, I thought maybe it was nervousness. Maybe she was protective, but it wasn't nervousness. There was no blinking, no small talk, no polite laughter. Just a fixed stare that made my stomach tighten. Lily tried to break the tension, chatted about work, music, and movies, but her mom didn't answer. She just looked at me, and with each passing minute, that look started to feel heavier, like it was pressing against my chest. I kept trying to act casual, sipped my water, nodded at her comments, laughed at Lily's jokes, but every time I glanced toward her mom, I felt my throat dried up. She didn't smile. She didn't blink at anything I said. She just stared, and I realized I couldn't even tell what she was thinking. It wasn't anger or suspicion. It was something colder, something deliberate. We ordered food. The pasta arrived steaming, the scent of garlic and tomato filling the small booth. I tried to focus on the meal, tried to ignore the pressure of her eyes. Lily seemed oblivious, chatting away, leaning closer to me, sharing stories, but her mom sat there like a stone statue, unyielding. Every gesture I made felt exaggerated under that scrutiny. Every sip of water, every bite of pasta, every laugh. She catalogued it all with that same unblinking stare. I noticed small things. When Lily asked if I wanted wine, her mom's eyes narrowed slightly. I tried to talk to her mom once, asked her opinion on the wine, anything to break the silence. She didn't respond, just held my gaze, lips pressed together, shoulders stiff. I felt my chest tighten, a low hum of panic growing in my stomach. It was absurd, I knew, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a mom watching her daughter's date. It was something else entirely, something intentional, something designed to unsettle me. The longer the night went on, the more I felt like I was under an interrogation. Each laugh, each gesture, each bite of food became evidence for her assessment. I kept adjusting my posture, trying to relax, but it didn't matter. Every time I thought I could ignore her, her gaze pulled me back, relentless, fixed, silent. I noticed other diners starting to glance toward our table, probably sensing the tension. Lily laughed, making small jokes about the pasta being too salty, trying to ease the mood, but her mom didn't react. She didn't even acknowledge the waiter bringing our drinks or refilling the water. Just me, just that stare, burning through my chest like a cold weight. I tried focusing on Lily, tried imagining the mom wasn't there, tried telling myself this was harmless. I don't know if it was my curiosity or just plain dumb luck that got me into that situation, but I'll never forget it. I matched with this guy, Matt, on Tinder. His profile said he was into magic and illusions, and I thought it was cute, a little cheesy. But something about his photos made me swipe right. He had this easy smile, a slightly crooked tooth, and eyes that looked like they were laughing even when his mouth wasn't. We texted for a week, kind of casually. He asked if I wanted to meet for drinks, and I agreed, thinking it would be simple, nothing too intense. We chose a small lounge downtown, one with low lights, scattered candles, and shelves of old books along the walls. It felt intimate without being suffocating, like the kind of place where people could talk for hours and disappear into the background. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting at a table near the window with a cocktail in hand. He waved, grinning like he had been waiting for me all day, and I realized my stomach was doing that weird flip it does when you're excited, but also on edge. I shrugged it off and went over, smiling back. We started talking, light stuff at first. Music, travel, Netflix shows. But then, out of nowhere, he started performing small tricks, like sliding coins across the table and making them vanish. I laughed, genuinely entertained, thinking he was just doing it for fun. But then he looked at me, with that same smile, and said he wanted to try something more personal. That's when I knew I might have underestimated him. He asked if he could borrow my ring. I had been wearing this simple silver band for years. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy, just a piece I liked. I hesitated for a second, but the way he asked, calm and confident, made it feel like it was part of the show. I handed it over, and he held it up, spinning it between his fingers. Then he did something I didn't see coming. He closed his hand around the ring, said something under his breath I couldn't catch, and opened his hand again. The ring was gone. I blinked. My heart jumped. I looked at him, half laughing, half panicking, and he just smiled, like it was perfectly normal, and asked me to check my purse. I frowned, dug around in my bag, and pulled out my wallet, my keys, a few receipts, and there it was. A ring, identical to mine, resting on top of my phone. My mind scrambled. I pulled my hand away, looked at him, looked at the ring, looked at him again. It was my ring. It wasn't supposed to be there. I hadn't put it there. Matt laughed, a soft, almost teasing sound, and said it was part of the trick. He slipped my real ring back onto my finger, but something didn't feel right. I glanced down at the duplicate, still in my purse. It was perfect. The same scratches I had from years of wearing it, the same tiny dent on the side. It wasn't a prop. It was my ring. I tried to brush it off, tell myself I had somehow imagined it, that it was a coincidence, but the feeling in my chest wouldn't let me. I couldn't shake the unease, the tiny knot of fear in my stomach that tightened every time I looked at him. He didn't seem aware of my tension. He was relaxed, charming, acting like this was normal, like this was just how magic worked. We continued talking, but I couldn't focus on the conversation. Every gesture he made, every word he said, felt loaded, like there was some meaning I wasn't grasping. My eyes kept drifting to the ring in my purse, and my hands fidgeted on the table. The lounge felt smaller, the lights dimmer, the shadows deeper, like the room itself was leaning in to watch me. He performed more tricks, small illusions with coins, cards, and even a napkin that disappeared and reappeared under my drink. I laughed, but my laughter was hollow, forced. My mind kept returning to the duplicate ring. How had it gotten there? Was it always there? Had I imagined giving him my ring in the first place? After an hour, I asked if he wanted dessert. He agreed, suggesting we move to a booth in the back. The corner felt secluded, private, but even there I couldn't relax. Every time I reached for my bag, my fingers brushed the duplicate ring, and I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to ruin the night or seem paranoid. We finished our dessert, and he leaned back, looking satisfied with himself. I realized I hadn't been able to enjoy a single moment. The tricks, which should have been fun, now felt like a test, like he had orchestrated something I couldn't fully understand. I glanced down again at the ring. It wasn't just a trick anymore. It was a reminder that the night had shifted, that something in this small lounge, in this tiny corner of the world, had changed. I decided to leave. I told him I had an early morning and needed to head out. He smiled, waved, and walked me to the door. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a splash. I breathed in deeply, trying to shake off the tightness in my chest. I felt safe for a moment, but the weight of the duplicate ring in my purse kept me from fully relaxing. I got home, dropped my bag on the couch, and stared at the duplicate ring. My real ring was on my finger, perfect, familiar. The other ring sat there, identical in every way. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, felt the cold metal, noticed every tiny scratch, every tiny imperfection that matched my own ring. My mind raced. How could this be possible? I thought about calling Matt, asking him to explain, but I couldn't. Something in the night had shifted too much. He wasn't just a magician. He was something else, something that played with reality in ways I couldn't comprehend. I slipped the duplicate ring into a small box and tucked it away, deciding I didn't want to deal with it anymore, but even then, I felt like the night wasn't over, like the trick wasn't finished. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I looked at my real ring, my chest tightened. Every time I thought about the duplicate, my mind raced with possibilities I didn't want to consider. Was it a trick of the light, some clever sleight of hand, or something that defied explanation? I didn't know, and I didn't want to know. I haven't seen Matt since that night. I haven't matched with anyone else from Tinder. I keep the duplicate ring hidden, locked in a drawer I don't open often, but sometimes at night I think about it. Think about that quiet little lounge, the flickering candlelight, the way he smiled while holding my ring between his fingers. The unease, the disbelief, the fact that something so familiar could feel so alien, it lingers. And that's the thing. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, it wasn't dramatic. It was just wrong. A small, perfect thing that shouldn't have existed, but did. Something that makes you question your own memory, your own perception, the reality of a night that started out simple and ended with a piece of yourself duplicated in a way you can't explain.